All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. I am your host, Jason Muse, aka the Black Muse, and welcome to the Black Muse podcast. I'm excited today because I have yet another special guest from Clubhouse, the social audio app. It is a person that goes by the name Tali. And without further ado, here she is. How you doing, Tali?
I am doing good, Jason. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. I can't complain. Another day above dirt. Uh, I would love for you to tell my audience how we met. How do we know each other? We don't know each other very well at all,
We
actually.
don't.
Like literally just met, but like, how do we know each other?
Yeah, it's just a little bit of fangirl behavior. I'm a big fan of going into your rooms and the different conversations that you curate on Clubhouse. And I was, going through your profile and saw that you had a podcast. I think maybe even one iteration before this podcast, the Black News podcast. And so I started listening. Big fan of your content here as well. And so I think I reached out during a Clubhouse room actually that you were having on the topic of today's discussion and said, I'd be interested in talking about this a little more deeply on a podcast episode.
Yeah, and so for me, like the thing about that's bizarre about just Clubhouse and now even me doing this kind of creative outlet or project with my podcast is I never really saw myself as a podcaster or a content creator or even really ever evaluated my ability to be good at any of that. It just wasn't on my radar. But I have been, I got into Clubhouse because like many people during the pandemic, I was bored and I was locked in my house basically, and I it was one way to have social interaction fairly consistently. Um, and eventually I started doing rooms, but at first I used to just be an audience member in rooms because I didn't really know what Clubhouse was, and it seemed like the people with the mod badges needed to have some kind of competence, and I didn't go to the University of Moderation of Clubhouse or
How long did Clubhouse keep you fooled into thinking that moderators had some type of expertise
for
in their subject?
exactly 4 days. Because
Okay.
after that, I stumbled across some mods where I'm like, I don't think they know what they're doing.
No.
But I kept gravitating towards the mods that did, and so I would just kind of self sort. And if I felt like mods were doing a good job, I would stay in their rooms and listen. If I felt like they weren't, I would leave and find someone else. And Clubhouse had so many different rooms; it was kind of like overwhelming. It's like going to like a kid in a candy store. It's like there's so many
Hmm.
different candies. I don't know where to start. Clubhouse kind of had that vibe for me. And then I started like understanding trends that mods would do. They would do things that seemed like they made sense. Like, oh, okay, like that's a good way to like make sure people don't speak over each other. And it's like, and then people, the clubhouse lingo, it's like I'm so and so and
Yeah,
I'm done speaking. And like there was like an etiquette. And so I'm like, okay, and it's
totally.
it's amazing how you pick up on that stuff like really quick. Like we're almost primed to recognize social cues. And so a lot of it was corny to me though. I was just like, I would never say it like that. But I would say things like, I would say I made it my own little thing. At one point I was saying like I'm done speaking and I welcome any constructive feedback or something like that. It was just like that felt like I'm landing my plane still, but like I don't use that term landing my plane. But now
Mhm.
after a while you just start using that lingo. But
I was gonna say
now
there's really no way around it after a certain point.
but now it's like Clubhouse is now a legit community and I feel like I'm a part of something and I wasn't really trying to be a part of something. I'm actually not a joiner.
Hmm.
But I've been getting a lot of, positive feedback about the way I mod rooms, and it wasn't something that I just thought of myself as especially good at. I think I've gotten better over time, and I've had bad rooms where I didn't mod as well as I probably could have and stuff like that. But overall, I think I do a good job. But there's a lot of techniques that I've learned in other contexts from my debate background
Yeah.
to I literally used to teach a class called speech and composition where I used to teach ninth graders how to facilitate discussions, what we used to
Hmm.
call Socratic seminars. um, and so I literally had to explicitly teach them how to have conversations, how to curate them, how to lead them. And a lot of those principles I taught my kids, I ended up using on Clubhouse. So people thought I was especially great, but it was just like I was just using skills that I was transferring from other domains to a domain
Right.
where it felt like it was good. And now Clubhouse has become like almost like a recruitment factory for like guests on my podcast. So like that's like working for me double, and I kind of like it. Um, and yeah, so I view our interaction, our kind of chance encounter, as like the product of that kind of thing. And you never know in a couple of weeks who else I might meet in a random room. Like, hey, you want to come on my podcast? Or some random mofo. It's just like, yeah, let's talk. Let's like have a conversation.
Totally. Yeah, no, I think your sort of debate style, like you're saying, really comes across, and it makes for a good facilitation of a discussion. And I think, I'm really not trying to grease you up here, but it makes people want to have a good conversation. I think you challenge people to rise to the occasion, and you are very a lot of generosity of spirit and of intention for the people speaking. I think my experiences on Clubhouse have morphed a lot over time, as I'm sure it has for many people. Like you said, you sort of started in the audience. I would say it's really been the reverse for me. When I came in hot on the app, and I would talk in big rooms and lots of social rooms. Definitely sort of built out a little community here on Clubhouse. But like being married, the person that you live with doesn't always love you, like getting triggered every day and screaming at your phone. So I've scaled back, and I opened a business in the last year, so my time has, my availability has decreased quite a bit. But the
Yeah.
way that I interact on Clubhouse has changed a lot. I used to really like it was like pushing a button. I would literally be like, I want to be triggered. And if this room is not triggering me enough, I will go to another room that's going to trigger me.
That's a fascinating claim.
I swear
I
it
want
too.
to be triggered today.
No,
I'm
it's true.
hooked.
It's like the thrill of it. Because
Yeah, I think social media has that impact in general. But Clubhouse
totally.
has a particular modality of engagement where you can have conversations. Twitter, you can tweet back and forth. Facebook, you can post back and forth. And on Twitter, you can also, and actually on Facebook, you can have like social spaces kind of like this. But it seems like people aren't primed or normed on engaging in those ways. People
Hmm.
kind of default to like the original ways to engage on both those platforms. But they have Twitter Spaces now, and they're kind of becoming. I think it's mostly the Clubhouse people who are usually using
Yeah,
that because they like that modality of engagement. But a lot of
for
people
sure.
don't want to because they don't feel sure of themselves. Maybe they're not good at gathering their thoughts vocally or whatever verbally. So I think
Totally.
people
Well,
kind of
Clubhouse is very self-selecting in that way,
yeah.
a bunch of people who are willing to speak. I remember the first time I spoke on Clubhouse, and even still sometimes. I mean, yesterday I was, I felt this happening too. I was like so short of breath the first time I spoke on Clubhouse because it's quite nerve-wracking to
Right.
speak off the
Right.
cuff to a large audience.
Yeah, it's its own dynamic. I mean, public speaking is kind of something I'm really accustomed to. So I very rarely, or I guess I should say, because I felt nervous in clubhouse rooms for sure, but I've
Hmm.
developed a bunch of like skills around managing those butterflies. And then once I'm on a roll, I'm kind of on a roll. And
Hmm.
sometimes I go on these rants, and some of my rants are better than others, but sometimes I go on these rants where I feel like I'm in the zone and I'm making all my points and I'm breaking it down. And
Hmm.
like people would report to me, and this is kind of the only confirmation I have, is like, oh, I was impressed by that. And then sometimes I go on rants and I feel like I didn't quite articulate that the way I wanted to. Sometimes people report like, "Oh no, I was still impressive." I'm like, "Nah," but maybe I'm on my own worst critic or I'm being too harsh on myself. But
Hmm.
sometimes I'm like, "Nah," either I was too aggressive or I didn't quite use the right words to articulate what I was trying to say, or I was too wordy. I'm very wordy sometimes,
Hmm.
and I can tell that some people don't like that. I'll read the chats and it's like, oh, this guy's droning on. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm trying to make a point though. But yeah, Clubhouse is a very interesting place, and it's still a place that it packs a certain amount of memory of mystery, I should say, because
Hmm.
it's still like I don't know quite what it is. It's its own thing. It's not like anything else
Yeah, and
in
I
a
don't
lot of
know where
ways.
it's going. And
Exactly.
yeah.
And I'm emotionally invested in it. Like if Clubhouse ended tomorrow because of some unfortunate mishap with they ran out of money or whatever, which they've been saying is going to happen for a while now, I would actually be sad. Like,
Mhm.
oh, like my new favorite toy is broken,
Yeah.
or you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
it's a very narrow. very niche pocket of our society where I feel not only I feel um that I have some kind of stature. And it's weird because it's in some sense not real life. Like it is, there are real people on there, but like social media is only so real, if that makes sense. Social media is only there is a distinction to be had between social media life and real life, let's say. And it's not exactly clear what how real or non-real social media is. There's some reality to it, but it's not all the way real. Part of it is because you can kind of it enables you in general to kind of pretend to be something you're not. But even if you're being your true self, it's like there's only so much of yourself people can understand because it's limited and through the modalities that you interact. So people know my voice, but they don't necessarily know what I look like when I emote my facial expressions when I speak. This is the first time maybe you've seen my face while I speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I would venture to guess, because this happens to me all the time when I bring people from Clubhouse onto this platform, is it's like I if especially if I'm familiar with them. With you, I'm not as familiar with you, but if I'm familiar with
Right.
them, it's like I see you speaking, and it's like that's not really how I pictured you
Yeah.
when I had my imagination like of you in my head. It's like I
Hmm.
like you're different. It's not necessarily bad. It's just like, but that's not what I. And so I would imagine it's probably that with you. It's like, oh, you're different from what I thought you would be.
For sure. And there's like um, a group of people that I sort of made friends with from Clubhouse that we would all do Zooms and stuff. And like you're saying, the same experience of like, huh, there's a human actually attached to you. And I don't know if I actually have you met anybody from Clubhouse in real life?
Yeah, it's a very rare occurrence though. Part of it was because of the pandemic at first, and then part of it is because there's like a stigma associated with the hookup culture that has permeated parts of Clubhouse. And I'm not really that kind of person. So like I'm
Yeah.
not trying to
Definitely
fly
never
out
got
random
involved in that.
yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
trying to fly out random girls to hook up and stuff. But and I'm gonna give you sparing details because we are recording. There have been uh three occasions where I met three different people. Um uh One of them was just somebody who was just a friend who happened to be in the area, and he and I went out for dinner, just kind of hung out, and we ended up talking in much the same way we would talk on Clubhouse about politics and stuff.
Hmm.
And it got kind of heated. We started talking about abortion in the middle of this restaurant. It was weird. It was like we probably shouldn't do that here, but we,
That's
we
where you
just
should
did it.
keep Clubhouse culture on the app.
Yeah, that's what you probably should. But I was like, yeah, landing my plane. And like it's funny, like it became a joke, but it was like we're using Clubhouse lingo in real life, and it's
Hmm.
like that's a Clubhouse. If you're on Clubhouse, you know what that is. That's hilarious. Um, and then yeah, and then another one was this other dude that it was the same thing, just kind of friendship thing. He was in town, met up. He just happened to be in San Francisco. And then the other one was somebody who I'm romantically interested in, and
Oh,
so yeah, so that person and I met up, and it went well, and it's still kind of going. So wish me luck, I guess. It's still new.
that's that's pretty
Yeah.
steamy stuff. Wow, good luck.
Yeah,
That's exciting.
she's amazing, but she's apprehensive, I think, because of the way you meet people. Like, you know what I mean, like I don't know how serious this is. There's a long distance element and all that kind of stuff,
Mhm.
but um I probably have said
It's
too much.
very
She's very private, so she doesn't like. So that's why I'm being very vague, but I can tell you that much. So
it's
yeah,
very like lesbian culture of you to fall in
lesbian
love
culture.
with some woman long distance on the internet.
Why is that a lesbian thing? Is that like common?
Yes, that's like a pretty classic meme. Is like lesbians and their long distance relationships.
Okay. Well,
Yes,
so last thing I want to say before we get into our topic proper, so you are in Hawaii, the Aloha State, correct?
I am.
So I used to live there for 6 years, 7 or 8 years ago. So 7 or 8 years ago, I lived there for
Okay.
6 years, if that makes sense.
What brought
um,
you out here?
so I was recruited by a program called Teach for America, and that's how
I
I got
had a
into
feeling.
education. and I was recruited, and I was teaching on the Big Island, Hawaii Island,
Okay.
in a remote location, the town of Kohala.
Okay.
And I taught in the whole complex there, the elementary, middle, and the high school over a span of 6 years.
Wow.
And some of the best days of my young life, my early working days, first real job, I would say post college. I had jobs before that, but it's my
Right.
first real job post college, and got a chance to coach and mentor and do all kind of stuff out there, and it was
Oh.
paradise. So I miss it. Which island are you on, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm on Oahu.
Okay, that's what I would have guessed. That's what
Did you
a lot of
spend any
people.
time over here?
Yeah, I would visit. I had friends over there through the program, people who are part
Okay.
of my cohort, or
Right.
what they used to call um our, what do they call us? They called us, it wasn't cohort, it was something else. Anyway, my cohort. And so yeah, we used to visit usually for spring breaks and stuff. I would fly over and
Fun.
visit with somebody, stay at their spot a couple of times. At the time I was dating somebody else. So that person would fly and meet me, and maybe we'd go to Oahu or we'd go to Maui. One time we went to Maui. So I've done the long distance thing before, but
Yeah,
yeah,
that's funny.
it can, yeah. So and it was funny. It was like, we had a breakup or whatever, and then I was like, I'm never doing long distance again. And then I met this person on Clubhouse, and that ended up being a long distance. So I'm like, I kind of went back on it, but she's kind of
Yeah.
worth it though. So I think
Yeah.
she's really awesome. And I see a lot of potential in her. But it's all new. I don't want to jinx it, but like, yeah, it's and I
It's
don't even
very
know what it is yet. It's not like really well defined either. It's like we're kind of, I don't know. Anyway, I don't want to get too
that's very
revealed.
it's very sweet hearing you talk about it, honestly.
But yeah, so Hawaii, you've been there your whole life or recently,
No,
or
I've been here like close to 6 years, maybe 5.5 years.
okay,
I'm from New York, so I was born and raised in New York, and then moved here for graduate school. Um,
Manoa?
yeah, UH Manoa, and I did like half of my PhD, and then COVID hit,
Okay.
and so I was on a little break, and then I never went back, and then I started a little, not so little anymore, but a small business, and that's what I do full time now.
Okay. And any plans to get back to finish your PhD?
What are you, my mother?
No, I was just curious.
No, I know. Uh, no, certainly not right now. I'm quite burnt out from it, pretty disillusioned of the system,
Yeah.
by the system. Maybe. I love what I'm doing right now. I make bagels.
Oh,
So,
okay. That's dope.
it, yeah, I make and sell bagels. And so I really enjoy doing that. And if I can sustain this and, do this long term, that would be the goal.
What was your area of study for your PhD program?
Clinical psychology.
Okay. Cool.
It's very, well, it's interesting to me. Perhaps you'll find it interesting as well. Um, in the last, since really my time on Clubhouse, so I joined Clubhouse May 2021,
Okay.
and since then, to today, January 2023, I've had like a political shift, um, and I guess like an ideological shift. The two kind of go hand in hand, um, and so much of like what I see as my life as a grad student is foreign to me is totally the wrong word, because it's all like I resonate really clearly with how I felt and my feelings then, but I feel so far removed from it now, and like I was like researching microaggressions,
Hmm.
believing that they were like a real and harmful thing. And so it's
Hmm.
interesting for me now, a few years later, to be more in the coddling of the American mind framework of how trying to protect people from feeling uncomfortable is actually really detrimental to people's health. And so it really does feel like I had a whole different mindset when I was on that track in a really different environment.
Some would describe that as being red pilled.
I know. Jason, I struggle. Let me tell you. Um, what are the other options? Like black pilled, white pill. I never seen, the
Black pill
Matrix. I
and
don't know
white
the
pill aren't really, yeah,
reference.
black pill and white pill aren't really from the Matrix. Those are kind of permutations. Black pill is basically you're pessimistic. White pill is you're
Okay.
optimistic. Red pill
Oh,
usually implies that you've been in some sense awakened to the truth of usually right leaning
yeah.
perspectives, and blue pill would be the go in the opposite direction.
Right. Yeah. I red pilled is so closely associated to me with like people who I don't associate myself with. Like I think of red pilled and I think of like, well,
Like
not to be.
conservatives.
No, because I have no problem with conservatives. That's actually not what I mean at all. Because that's been a
Ah,
big evolution for myself too. I think of like the QAnon people that I was making fun of 3 years ago, who in their bio it was like follow Q hashtag and then the little pill, right? Red dash pill emoji. And so I have like a really negative connotation of that phrase. But yeah, I mean, I was like a really far leftist. I was the type of person that took offense to the word liberal because it was like so not left enough. It was not progressive enough, and liberals like might as well be right wing. All of these things. That was my kind of personality, and some of it was so much of it is just repeating things that other people say,
yeah.
and it's easy to like to shit on that, but really that is like so instinctual to that's how we learn in many ways. And also like when there's someone that you respect, that you think that your values align with and your priorities align with, you're more likely to trust what they say and repeat it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was sort of where I was, and where I fall now is a good question. um I've been moved to the center, certainly. And then on certain issues, like I'm sure the interesting thing is, as a Jew, as a Zionist Jew, who came onto Clubhouse and in my life was sort of a progressive activist. I was an activist. That's the best word to describe what I was. I would go to protests multiple times a week, and just felt like that was like the most important thing I really could be doing with my time. But when I got on Clubhouse as a progressive Zionist, people would just call me a conservative every day. Like, this is classic conservative talking points, and it pissed. And at first, I would argue with it a lot. Like, that's ridiculous. Because the conservative to me was also sort of the enemy. Um, and then at a certain point, the more people beat you with that, you're like, okay, sure, you want to think I'm a conservative, go for it. I'm a conservative. And then I was like, let me listen to some conservatives. Like, well, who are these conservatives that I'm being accused of being?
Yeah.
And I said to my friends recently, like, one of the biggest hurdles of getting out, and this is so sad, but I think it's true for me and probably true for others. One of the biggest hurdles for me of being able to see things differently was like not assuming that because someone is a Republican or a conservative that they are inherently a bad person, not attributing bad faith to someone who has different ideas or beliefs or values than me, which is a small thing, but was a huge thing in opening my mind to listening to different perspectives. And
Mm.
debate did a lot of that too. Intelligence Squared. I'm sure you're familiar with Intelligence Squared if you're a debater.
Mm.
I've always loved debates, but I got really into it in my sort of political awakening. Because what an
Mm.
incredible way to seek knowledge and understanding, like in the simplest, most binary kind of way of looking at it, you're either going to really strengthen your argument by knowing the other person's arguments and the strength of theirs, or you learn something new and you change your mind. And if you're an honest person and you care about integrating new information, then when something challenges a belief that you held, you change it, or you're willing to engage further. But yeah, this was all part of my process. I just said a lot of things, so you can
No, I enjoyed hearing it. I've heard stories similar to that before, and it's interesting people's political journey. I've heard stories where people start really left and kind of go either more towards the center or sometimes all the way to the right. I've heard people start right and kind of go more towards the center or maybe go all the way left. So it's interesting to hear kind of people's journey. And a lot of the stuff you said resonates with me. I think, my background in philosophy, so that was my major as an undergrad in college. So the critical thinking skills, being able to see all sides of a philosophical issue, is cultivated certain kind of expectations in terms of my intellectual maturity. And then on top of that, because while I was in college, I did debate, and then I ended up teaching debate as a debate coach.
Hmm.
Um, Knowing both sides of a debate actually helped me, no matter what. I was prepared to argue all sides, and so that kind of ambidextrousness intellectually was something that
Hmm.
was really valued in that context, and then I ended up valuing it more broadly. So like,
Hmm.
I'm always striving, I think, on Clubhouse even, like if I feel like a room is mostly right leaning, then I feel an obligation to give voice to the leftist side, because
Yeah.
there's some points on the left that are going to be valid, and people are not going to recognize them because the people who are available to give voice to it either aren't that good at it, or maybe there's some facets or facts that they don't even know about that they couldn't bring to the table because they don't know, so they need to be helped. So I had this whole thing about steel manning, and I'll do it to whoever I think needs it. Like I have this thing of like, I'll flip sides pretty quick. Like just I'm like, okay, wait. So you said X, Y, Z. Um, Maybe if you try this, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that does help my argument. And then it's like, okay, now everybody's piling on the other guy. I'm like, wait a minute, what about this? Let's talk about this. Oh yeah. And so now I think the level of discussion is elevated, because now we have all of these points and complexities on both
Hmm.
sides. It's not just 1 2, like two punch, now you're out. Because like a
Yeah.
lot of people approach to Clubhouses like, I have this like argument, it wins every time, and here's my argument, and now you lose, and now you're dumb. And it's like, but yeah, but like there's so
So much
much
self
nuance in this.
righteousness.
Some of it is sanctimonious and it's smug, and I don't like that. But also, it's like you've literally deprived everyone of understanding all of these nuances fully. So now people who agree with you are going to come away thinking that it's overly simplistic when it's not. It's actually way more complicated than that. And I don't think that that helps anybody. So
Hmm.
I always feel like this obligation to at least try. And sometimes I try and I fail
Hmm.
because my understanding is limited, my biases are showing, or I'm overly emotional about certain topics too. So sometimes I
Hmm.
get in my own way. But I think sometimes I'm successful in like elevating it. So now it's like, okay, everybody's got to be on their game, because Jason is going to question you no matter what side you're on. Jason's not going to
Hmm.
favor your side every time. Sometimes I lean certain ways, and so maybe I favor it. But like for the most part, though, I'm pretty neutral in the
You
rooms.
totally are. I mean, that was one of the my first impressions of you was like, I don't know what he thinks about this. I think like one of the early memories I have was a room about I think it was like about like felons having the right to vote. It might have been about
I did have a
the
room with that
Florida.
topic.
Yeah.
I didn't
Um,
talk that much in that felons room, but I had a room about, I had a couple rooms about DeSantis. I've
mhm.
had a bunch of rooms about pretty much any hot topic. I try to have rooms about.
Yeah. But I remember just distinctly feeling like I don't know what this guy's opinion is on this. And I think that's a benefit. If, like you're saying, when you can argue the other person's side just as good or maybe better than them, it lends you a lot of credibility in the conversation. And like you said, I think it just elevates it. Something that like that you don't do that I appreciate that again was sort of part of pushing me out of the left um, is this idea of like it's simple. Everything's simple, right? It's
Yeah.
just this, and we can't talk about it, right? Because then that's like white supremacy or something. Like you're
There's
trying to
always
convolute
there's
it.
always some group of people somewhere who's going to be harmed if we talk about it, so we can't talk
Yeah,
about it.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's just this idea that it's simple. And again, for me, the real beginning of this turning point was May 2021, which was coincidentally when I joined Clubhouse, but it was also the sort of most recent big flare up between Israel and Gaza.
Mm.
And so that's when everyone is it's simple. This is this is genocide. It's simple. This is, and I'm like, no, it's actually not simple. It's
Yeah.
actually not simple, and you're not helping anybody by pretending that it is.
Yeah.
And yeah, people will like sort of make fun of the nuance mongerers, right? Like people who are always insisting on bringing nuance to a conversation. Um, but that's
Mhm.
almost always better than the opposite.
There are some cases I think where people will leverage complexity or nuance to obfuscate things that do not benefit a certain conclusion they have prescribed, and so I actually don't mind people who have a healthy suspicion of that kind of thing,
Hmm.
because you can kind of intuit it. Like this dude is like, there's something weaselly about this person's approach to this subject matter, and it's actually not bringing clarity. It's making it seem like something, but I have this intuition that it's not really that way. And I think
Hmm.
a lot of people pick it up on that, but some people are really keen. They know exactly what they're doing. And so I get that suspicion. But sometimes people, I think there's like they false flag that. Like they think that's what's happening, but actually the person is actually in good faith trying to be nuanced. And I've been accused of this too. Is like, you're just acting like, I'm like, no, I actually genuinely think these things matter for these reasons.
Yes.
But
Right.
because I have a certain kind of clarity of understanding of the nuances, it's a lot. I think and also because I'm pretty good with words, a lot of people get the sense of like, no, he kind of gets what he's talking about. Now,
Hmm.
not everybody feels that way. Some people genuinely don't like me, and that's fine. I'm not gonna win everybody over,
Right.
but like as long as I know I'm engaging in good faith, even if I'm wrong, right, and I don't lose
Hmm.
sight of my fallibility, I think overall I'm good. Because I'm
Hmm.
the same person I'll come back 5 minutes later and be like, hey, you know that thing that I said? I just did some research on Google. Turns out I was wrong for this, that, and reason. I apologize. I'll do
Right.
that. People have seen me do that and they're like, okay, then I build trust with people when you do that. Because it's
Absolutely.
like he's willing to admit when he's wrong. He's not in here. And sometimes I do, I have my tendencies towards arrogance. So sometimes I kind of get into this kind of arrogant, like I'm the smartest person in the room. And sometimes I gotta check myself, like, first of all, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase before, but
Hmm.
like that's first of all. And secondly, a lot of times when you think that, you're not the smartest person in the room. Not
Hmm.
only because you think that, but also because like you don't know what other people know. So
Hmm.
I got to check myself sometimes too. Um, but with that, because now we've been fraternizing for 30 minutes, and
Uh-oh.
I knew it would go long because we didn't really know each other that well. So I'm trying to get a
Yeah.
feel for who you are. But we're gonna engage pretty seriously with some pretty deep, high stakes topics. So I'm gonna awkwardly transition now to the topic
Let's do it.
proper. So you and I are going to delve into a discussion, speech versus free speech, and so you are going to be part two in a series that I'm doing on the subject matter, and we are going to delve into the nuances of what happened with good old Ye West, and also eventually Kyrie Irving, and probably anybody else that is germane to the subject matter. But the kind of hate speech versus free speech debate is a very, I think, complicated and nuanced debate going on in our public discourse, and there's a lot of implications for society, implications for our conduct in social media spaces, our conduct in general spaces, but especially social media where you can like have like you can be platformed and your speech can go viral and have all kinds of impacts, sometimes inadvertent. It has impacts for our legal system. I
Hmm.
think, particularly in other countries that don't have like a robust free speech tradition like in the United States, but I think there are people who are kind of chipping away at a lot of the assumptions that we have that undergird our free speech legal tradition, and they want to have certain caveats around certain kinds of speech that aren't allowed, that have a special connection with harm that can be done in the world. And I think that's where the hate speech thing comes in. So that's the subject matter that we're going to cover right now. So I guess to kind of launch us into it, if you had to give a definition of hate speech, how would you define that? And Phil, you can Google stuff, by the way, it's not cheating, but I'm genuine. I'm trying to pick your brain. Like, if you had to define hate speech, how would you define that?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to give you a bad answer, which is I don't know. That's something that has like my feelings or beliefs around have really shifted. I mean, I said before that I was previously studying microaggressions, and so I believed that like a lot of things, really, even things that might be seen as inconsequential to other people, could be sort of low scale hate speech in some ways,
Mm-hmm.
or causing harm. Yeah, maybe Googling and just taking a definition and working off that might be the safest way, but I don't know. I think that's kind of what we're here to discuss. because I think even if you can define hate speech, it's sort of hard to classify speech into hate speech or not hate speech.
How about the UnitedNations.org? You think that's a good source?
You should never ask a Jew what they think about the United Nations. Yeah, yeah, let's go with it. Let's go with it.
All right, we're gonna go United Nations. That was a good one.
Thank
Never
you.
ask a Jew. I got it. That's words to live by.
There
All
you
right, what
go.
is hate speech? In common language, hate speech refers to offensive discourse targeting a group or an individual based on inherent characteristics such as race, religion, or gender, and that may threaten social peace. Uh, to provide a unified framework of the United Nations for the United Nations to address the issue globally, the UN Strategy Plan of Action on Hate Speech defines hate speech as, quote, any kind of communication in speech, writing, or behavior that attacks or uses pejorative or discriminatory language with reference to a person or a group on the basis of who they are. In other words, based on their religion, ethnicity, nationality, race, color, spelled with a U, descent, gender, or other identity factor. However, today there is no universal definition of hate speech under international human rights law. The concept is still under discussion, especially in relation to freedom of opinion and expression, non discrimination, and equality. So it's a hazy, fuzzy,
It is.
ambiguous term. I'm going to make that big for my audience. But we have a start of a definition there,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
what do you let's pick this apart. What do you think of the definition?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very fuzzy, like you said. Taking a step back on a more macro level, like any good faith interpretation of hate speech, you would come to a similar definition. I think, right? Like it's
Mhm.
something that is offensive to someone on the basis of some immutable characteristic. But the word offensive, which appears right here in the first line, is the first issue here, because offense is subjective.
There are there are things that are generally regarded as offensive, and so there's a kind of collective agreement about offense with respect to certain things. Um, I think that, for example, if you were to refer to, let's say, a person who's missing a leg or who has an injured leg as a gimp, I think that broadly speaking in America, we would regard that as something that an a-hole would do. Like we
Mhm.
probably would be offended or disgusted or have some kind of indignation to that. Um, but there are things but they range in egregiousness. I think referring to an elderly person as old to their face where they can hear you, we might say that that's kind of something like that. It's a matter of bad social etiquette or maybe bad behavior in a social context. We might rank it low on the egregiousness scale, but some people, and this is kind of where it's subjective, that actually might be high on the egregiousness scale. Particularly if you're a person who is elderly, you might be more sensitive to that kind of thing. And I think as the years go on, I get more and more sensitive to those labels.
To the word old.
Yeah, I one of my I teach 6-year olds now, and
Oh,
one of them called me old, and it hit different. Like when I was teaching 10 years ago, and students used to say that, it was like whatever. I'm like in my 20s, like you don't know anything. But like now, it hits a little different, and I suspect if I'm teaching in my 40s and 50s, it's going to start to hurt more. When
yeah.
I get to that point. And if I'm
But to
60
be
and somebody
fair,
says that, it's gonna be I'm gonna be mad because it's true.
listen, everyone is old to a 6-year-old.
That's true, but
And,
that doesn't make me feel any better for
you
some
know,
reason.
this whole thing is very interesting because you're making a good point, and just even that the sort of silly example of calling people old. My dad
Mhm,
is old. He's
mhm.
15 years older than my mom, and so just like my whole life, he was older than my friend's parents, older than my mom, right? Things like that.
Right.
I've been calling my dad grandpa. He's not a grandfather, by the way. He has no grandchildren. I don't have children, but I've been calling him grandpa for a long time. But I say that to say. Even the example that you used of calling someone a gimp who's missing a leg. um, tell that to the GIMP community that it's an offensive term. And I say that like partially in jest, but there are certainly people out there who are self-identifying um, as a GIMP. The same way that I'm sure you would agree, or perhaps you would agree that like calling a fat person fat, particularly a fat person, is more offensive, I would say, than to call, a skinny person fat. But to call a fat person, someone who is large, fat, would be probably, again, universally understood as not nice or
Yeah,
offensive.
I
And it's
actually
also a
have a.
term that a lot of people self-identify with now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's actually somebody I know on Clubhouse who goes by Fat Man. That's what people call him. I don't even know what he looks like, but I'm assuming he's fat and he's just owning it. I
You better get him
guarantee
on the
him having that.
podcast. Expose this guy. He better be real
And
fat.
you know what? That's actually a great idea because he and I would probably talk sports stuff or nerdy stuff. He likes to he another thing that he gravitated towards because we first met in the context of sports rooms on Clubhouse. But
Okay.
another thing that he gravitated towards talking to me about is like what I call nerd or blurred black nerd stuff. We used
Mm-hmm.
to talk about Marvel movies, comic book movies, things like that,
Mm-hmm.
and that's something I'm into. But actually, yeah, having get him on the podcast is actually something. But he hasn't been on Clubhouse a lot lately, so I have to figure out
Maybe
where
he
he's
got
at.
found out.
He got found out. But yeah,
Yeah.
but that's funny. So I my 6 year olds because kids say the darndest things. Because I have a little bit of a gut now. Back in the day I used to be a specimen when I was lifting weights and stuff. And one of my kids came up to me and was like, "Mr. Muse, why are you fat?" And what I tell you, the hurt that came over me in that moment, and he didn't even. What added insult to injury was he tapped me on the belly. Like, this is evidence that you're fat. Like, you're obviously fat. Why are you this way? And like I was hurt, but he's 6. So I'm like, I can't get in my feelings too much because he's 6. So I kind of chuckled with that kind of awkward, I'm hurt, but I'm laughing it off laugh. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't like this, but I'm going with it because you're 6. Like that kind of laugh. And I'm like, you know what? I kind of, was being a good sport about it. Like, you know what? You're right. And I need to work on that. And that's why I'm gonna start jogging right now. And I've been jogging ever since.
In the classroom. Yeah, you just do laps around the classroom.
No, I actually like jog after work every day now,
Oh.
because I'm very self conscious about it
Damn, one
now.
6-year-old got to you.
He got right under my skin in exactly the way that I needed to hear, so that I can get out there and stop being lazy. So I'm like, you know
Mm.
what? I'm gonna do something about this. I joined the gym and everything. New year, new me, all that shit. So we're gonna see. I got 7 months to get a summer body, and I got plans with the person I told you about that I'm involved with. Hopefully, things go well and we're still together at that point. But I'm supposed to take her somewhere, and
Nice.
I want to have my summer body ready.
Okay. Well, listen,
So hopefully it
Jason,
works out.
you're gonna look beautiful either way. Okay.
I'd
Okay.
rather I'd rather not have a gut. I'd rather have at least a 4 pack,
Yes.
something. That's progress. But
Yeah.
no, but you're right. I think there are things that we kind of collectively share a common sense of what is generally regarded as offensive or egregious or not cool or the worst kind of person or something an asshole would do. There's a lot of agreement about that generally, but there's also a lot of discrepancy depending on how thick-skinned a person is, kind of what their
Mhm.
philosophies are, what ideological presuppositions they buy into. And so we have kind of like a split between two major factions. And there's people in between, but there's two major factions that have like wide variability in how they view what the proper way to handle offense is. On the one hand, you have the leftists that we stereotypically are talking about, and they have a whole paradigm around certain things being connected in a special way with certain kinds of harms, and by that they mean something non-trivial, something like pernicious, something that can actually hurt a person,
Mhm.
something that can actually cause trauma. And so when you fat shame, you're not doing something innocuous. You're doing something genuinely harmful to someone that could result in that person having negative body image, ranging all the way to suicidal ideation. And because you caused that, you are in some sense culpable. And so you ought not do that. They genuinely believe that. And I've
Yeah.
spoken with so many people, and they're not they're in good faith. They believe that with every
Totally.
fiber of their being.
I think, it's so funny. Again, I have like my past life staring at me because I have all my psych textbooks and stuff like on the shelf over here. And I have my like microaggressions book, which is the foundational, text of the foundational research on microaggressions. And it's referred to as death by a thousand cuts.
Mhm.
Death is not insignificant, right? And it's this idea
Mhm.
that all of these things, added together have this largely detrimental effect. But what I really want to reiterate of what you just said is the good faith aspect. And that's something again that I feel really strongly as someone who made that transition or has moved along the spectrum of belief, because I believed it with every fiber of my being.
Mhm.
Both in the self-righteous way that I cringe at now looking back, and maybe the way that I handled certain things or the way that I spoke to people or the way
Mhm.
that I acted. But it was there's a lot of people who like to attribute bad faith to leftists, right? Because they see a lot of what's the discourse as detrimental to our society, kind of what you were touching on a little bit before, right? And so
Mhm.
they want to say that these people are doing this with some nefarious intent. And I just think for the most part that's not true. And it
Mhm.
doesn't help to think that way, because if we think that the person with other views from us um, is disingenuous, right, or is nefarious in some way, we're really never going to come to some
Mhm.
common ground. If you think that the other person is a terrorist, it's hard to
Yeah.
have a conversation.
Yeah. Exactly. And there's a lot of impugning the motives of your political rivals. That's kind of
Yeah.
saturating our culture in general. And so and it comes from both sides. You have people on the right who do this with people with respect to people on the left, and then the same vice versa. And a lot of times in my engagement on Clubhouse is a reflection of the fact that I kind of reject that. I don't think that and I also need to be mindful, if I'm being honest, that I get caught up in that too, because I have my own preconceived notions about what woke people think and say, and I have
Mm-hmm.
my own preconceived notions about what the kind of rah far right some MAGA people think.
Mm-hmm.
Um and I don't like either of those. And so like when I feel like I'm encountering a person like that, sometimes I slip into stereotypical thinking and I start misattributing things to people because they sound similar to my
Mm-hmm.
stereotype that I have in my head of people. And I don't like when people do that to me. So I always have to like kind of take a step back and be like, all right, am I doing that thing I do sometimes? All right, let me take a step back. Let me give the person the benefit of the doubt. Let me show that I'm not trying to impugn your motives. I don't know what your motives are yet,
Mm-hmm.
right? But like sometimes I'm very transparent and blunt though. I'm like, I suspect this is what you're doing. I could be wrong, but this is what I think you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing that, please stop. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that's not received well. People don't like the accusation. The accusation is
No.
enough.
Mm-hmm.
But some people are kind of like understanding. Like at the very least, I softened it. It's like, okay, I don't know if that's true. So there's some qualification to it. But the other thing I wanted to touch on is like I think the facet where you said that you kind of look back and cringe on yourself. Like I have a kind of analogous story coming from somebody who was raised very conservative Christian. I have a Christian upbringing. My dad is still involved in the church to this day, um, and I'm sure he doesn't like the fact that I don't actively go to church anymore, um, because that was a big part of my upbringing or whatever. Um, but I used to be like really, really religious, and I used to think things that I cringe at now. And I used to say things to people that I cringe at now. So, with respect to the LGBTQ community, everybody knows that the Christian fundamentalist types have this whole thing about how gay people are going to hell because, in the eyes of God, it's sin and all that. I used to say that to gay people regularly and casually, and like I didn't even really think I was saying anything particularly pernicious. I just was like, no, this is the way it is, and I want to save you. And there was a
Mm-hmm.
kind of sanctimoniousness to that, a kind of
Mm-hmm.
self righteousness to it. But to me, it wasn't the emphasis wasn't on the self righteousness. Like I'm morally superior to you because I'm not gay. That wasn't really the emphasis for me, but that was an implication of what I was saying, and I was kind of tone deaf to it. And I
Mm-hmm.
cringe on it now because I don't really feel like the Bible really justifies that stance in the way that I thought the Bible was authoritative. Back when I thought that. I used to say things about people in the Middle East because I was in high school when 9/11 happened.
Mm,
I was a dumb ninth grader who didn't know anything about geopolitics, who didn't know anything about people from the Middle East, and I would conflate people from that region of the world anyway. I conflated people who are from India with people who are from Pakistan. Um, and I had somebody who actually, ironically, at one point in high school, this is back in high school, so it doesn't matter. Apparently, used to like me, but I said some shit to her that now I look back on and I'm like, I can't believe I said that to this person.
hmm
Um, and I was really gung ho about going over there and blowing up whoever attacked us in the World Trade, and I was saying like conservative talking points without even realizing that that's what I was doing, because in my
Right.
mind, this is America. You don't mess with us. And those evil terrorist people are doing that. And they're Muslims, by the way. And I had all this weird religious, emotional investment in like, oh, the Muslims are bad people because they're not Christian or whatever. Um, but meanwhile, a lot of people of the Islamic faith didn't feel that way about Christians. And one of the people was this person that I called an Indian who was actually Pakistani, and she told me, she's like, I don't, she was genuinely trying to engage me in good faith, and I'm on my kind of religious high horse. And she's like, I don't get it. I don't understand why Christians think this about Muslims. We think that Christians are people of the book. That was the phrase that she used. I never even heard that phrase before her.
hmm
And I went to study it in college, and I realized that like a lot of people in the Islamic faith view kind of the way Christians view Jews. It's like you're in our Bible, like that Old Testament stuff. So you're good with us. It's like that, but like Christians are kind of like, then it's like not Christians. Then we go to Islam. And it's like you're people of the book too. Like we're cool with you. There's no feud here. And I was so dumb in ninth
You guys
grade.
are not in our book. I'm so sorry to tell you.
Well, we got the remix. we
Yeah.
got the re. No, but it's interesting to hear you say what you were saying about kind of how you look back on certain views you used to hold to, and without much critical thought, I think is the common theme, because I didn't really think critically about what I was being taught. It was imparted to me from people who I trust, who I felt like would not lead me astray, from my parents, members of my community, members of my church community, pastors. These are people who I came to regard with respect. And so if it came from them, it had to be true. There
hmm
wasn't really much need to question it. And it was from a very young age. It was from a developmental stage where I was very reliant on the wisdom of people older than me. And I was also taught not to question adults, by the way. That was actually a part of my upbringing. You don't ask.
Explicitly.
Yeah, you don't ask grown-ups why, because I said so. That's why. Like that was a very much a part of my upbringing. So it wasn't cultivated, even though actually naturally I had an inclination towards, I had a very inquisitive nature, and I really wanted to know the reasons why. But that was looked down upon. So there was this kind of
This is why
what.
you like the Jews, Jason. Because growing up for me,
Who said
I,
I like Jews? No, I'm just kidding.
Jason, you like Jews. This. I have another question for you, perhaps at the end, but about just what it's like to be the token goy in the room a lot of the time, because there's and I say
What does
token
that mean?
pejoratively but joking. Oh, so goy is it's a word for non-Jew. It's like it means
Oh,
Gentile essentially.
okay.
Um, but I'm very interested in like there's a few sort of characters on Clubhouse, all people that I happen to like, who especially recently I'm just noticing have like sort of been in. I shouldn't say been in the Jewish rooms because they're just where the most people in the room are Jewish. We have a community of Jews really on Clubhouse. Um, but I always think there's something like I'm intrigued by people who are not Jewish, who just kind of hang out around Jews in a non-creepy way, not in like the philo-Semitic way, but just kind of, I don't know, get along. I'll save it. I've already said too much. Um, but yeah, Jewish tradition. I mean, growing up, like you would get as a gift as a young person, like the Jewish Book of Why, and so asking questions is something that was encouraged of me as a young
Hmm.
person. So that's just interesting that I picked up on of what you were saying. But I think also what you were saying about believing people or not really having that element of critical thought I think it's interesting because you were a child, especially in the way that you sort of tell this story. But I think we kind of like what I was saying earlier. We do this as adults too, and part of it is really natural. Um, and it's also a way to like filter information. Like we don't have time in the day to think so critically, right, about all of our positions even. But in this social media world, there's a lot of pressure to have a position, to take a position. And
Yeah.
so you trust the person who normally you agree with, right, who normally their views line up with yours. And there's this I this idea in the British sociologist David Hirsch, he in a book that he has, contemporary left-wing anti-Semitism, which obviously is talking about anti-Semitism, but it's really taking a look at the modern left. He talks about the politics of position, versus the politics of reason, and how it's sort of this idea of like, if you're in the community of the good, if you're one of us, right? If you are saying the right things, or you're aligned in the right way, or you come from the right kind of identity category, that's more important in my alignment with you than reasoning through how you've gotten to the point that you've gotten to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, a lot of the things that when I look back too, I think about times where I was totally not thinking critically, or even a critical thought would slip in, and I would think like, but how does that make sense? I don't want to get too controversial, but like there are some like gender things that I recall a few years ago, even before some of this debate got so heated, having like a thought to myself and then pushing it away really consciously, like sort of like, but that's an offensive thought. And so therefore
Yeah.
it can't be true.
And yeah, and that oh my god, I want you to finish, but I got some.
No, you got to
Yeah.
cut me off because as you can tell, I have ADHD. So I'll just keep going and I lose where I started. So
Well,
cut.
since
Please
you
jump
said I could,
in. Yeah.
I mean, so that leads me to the parallels between, I think, religious thinking and religious dogmatism and more secular ideological dogmatism. So the religious dogmatism that hails from more religious type orthodox thinking and kind of prescriptions for certain ways of thinking that are cultivated in religious space. It's not universal because not every religious sect or denomination is as strict about what you can and can't think as
Hmm.
others. But there are versions of it, like the Christian fundamentalists, I think, are a good example of that. You have some pretty fundamentalist versions of Islam, even where there's a kind of a strict adherence to certain doctrine and you don't deviate.
Hmm.
Um, and perhaps this exists, versions of this in various sects of Judaism, maybe
Yeah,
Orthodox
certainly.
Judaism, things like that, where you don't deviate. And there's all this energy around justifications for adhering to the faith in a particular way.
Hmm.
I think that there are analogous elements with it when it comes to what we colloquially refer to as wokeness, but if you prefer critical social justice, which is kind of leftist ideology writ large, it's kind of the umbrella term. And then you have kind of, they wouldn't call them this, but you have like factions or sects that kind of, they agree on certain things, but they differ in this, like the equivalent of denominations. And what might be called in the religious case blasphemous
Mm.
would be called racist or bigoted, right?
Mm.
But it has a similar or analogous impact, which is that's off limits for thinking. You're
Hmm.
not allowed to think that because thinking that has all of these implications. In the religious case, it has all these theological implications for, in the Christian tradition, whether you're going to go to hell and burn forever or you're going to go to heaven.
Hmm.
And in the secular tradition, it has all these kinds of implications for the kind of person you are. There's a moral evaluation ascribed to you. And so, like, if you question, like, what is the rational basis for, like, just taking a person at their word when they say that they identify as a man, but they're clearly a woman by other standards? Like, right, like that's even controversial to ask
Hmm.
because to ask the question entails a deviation from a prescription about how to actually even interpret what is happening. that person is not clearly a woman. To suggest that in your question is to be transphobic. Therefore, the question not only doesn't get answered, but you lose points morally for even considering it and having the audacity to say that out loud. And if you say it out loud in a way where a lot of people can hear you, it's even worse because you're
Yes.
platforming hate. Like that is actually how these people think. And they
Hmm.
don't see the parallels between that way of thinking and fundamentalist paradigms in religion. They think of
No.
themselves as not anything to do with religion because their fundamental presuppositions don't start with
Hmm.
God and the afterlife. Their fundamental presuppositions are concerned with the world here on earth. And so because of that, I'm not like those evil, bad, super extreme Christian nationalist types who are
Totally.
secretly racist. Like I'm awoke. I'm educated. I'm intelligent. I'm a person of science and data. And that justifies my version of dogmatism. And like, I spend a lot of energy trying to help people like that see kind of what's wrong with that. And a lot of times, their version of dogmatism creates blind spots. They have the same type of blind spot or an analogous type of blind spot to what I had when I was a dumb ninth grader and I was saying stupid, like offensive shit to people in ignorance,
Hmm.
or at least in a certain kind of ignorance, right? Like I was ignorant to how offensive it could even be because I wasn't thinking outside of my paradigms. The consideration of other ways to think about this didn't even occur to me, right?
Where did you grow up?
Southern California,
Okay.
yeah. Um, and I had all of this like emotional. I would describe it as a very strong emotional investment or psychological dependence on these religious paradigms being true because I had based my entire conception of myself and my place in the world on all of these presuppositions. So to even consider that these might not be true had a it was the kind of thing that caused a lot of anxiety
Oh yeah.
because now I don't know what's true and I don't know how to operate in the world, and
Hmm.
that's scary. It's
Totally.
super scary because if I don't know how to operate in the world, I don't know what's up and what's down, and I don't. My entire moral compass is out of whack. And like what are the implications for all the things I've been doing? Why would I go to church? What about the things I've said to people? Like all of that was based on all of these things. And if you tell me those things aren't true, then and then does that mean that all the people that I've trusted my whole life have lied to me? Like
Mm.
all of that came rushing in as a philosophy student when I was at UCLA because I was for the first time brave enough to
Mm.
question the things I wouldn't allow myself to question. I had did what you did, and I would have these thoughts that were very natural. They would occur to me, and I would push them
Hmm.
very consciously out of my mind. Nope,
Yeah.
blasphemy, can't think about it. And
Hmm.
so to hear you say that is actually interesting.
Yeah. I mean, have you read John McWhorter's Woke Racism?
Excerpts, not I haven't read it in its entirety, and I've seen a lot of his speeches about it. So I kind of am familiar loosely with the content, but I'm not an expert. I'm just loosely
Okay.
familiar with it.
Well,
But he talks about a lot of this
he
stuff
does.
too. Yeah.
No, and what you were saying, like, is really the premise of his book is pointing out he goes through a few different phases. In the beginning of the book, he's pointing out the contradictions of this the woke racism that he's talking about, this sort of, he calls it the elect, the social justice warriors. He intentionally doesn't use that word because he doesn't want to be pejorative, in the same vein that you're going with, like good faith and generosity towards
Hmm.
people with different views. But then he focuses a lot of time on pointing out the parallels of how this is a religion of the non. And there's lots of sort of heterodox thinkers who talk about this, right? As
Hmm.
people get less religious, they're replacing it with another
John,
religion.
Jonathan Haidt talks about this.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm familiar with him through the Heterodox Academy, but I actually got introduced to Jonathan Haidt through Jordan Peterson.
Oh, okay.
Um, Jordan Peterson, I
Interesting.
don't know, him and Jonathan Haidt were doing something together, I think, as a part of the Heterodox Academy at some point. And I think Jonathan Haidt in in Canada too, if I'm not mistaken. He's at some university in Canada, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong.
I'm pretty
Uh,
sure he's at like NYU or something. I
Okay, so
thought
then
he
I
was.
take that back. If I'm wrong,
I think
I take it back. But
I could be
but
wrong.
he has some interest. I watched some YouTube videos on him, and that's how I got familiar. That's how I actually get familiar with a lot of kind of public intellectuals or whatever. Um, it's a lot easier than reading, but it motivate me to read their work after the fact a lot of times, right?
Yeah.
Um, it's like I always read the book of the movie after the after the movie.
After you've seen the movie.
I never read it before. I didn't. A
Well,
lot of times I didn't even know there was a book until the movie came out.
there you go. Well, I'm a
Oh
big
man,
like audiobook person, which is also I think why I love podcasts.
yeah.
That's a good way for me to digest information. Um, but yeah, so he talks about really the religiosity of this
Mhm.
secular movement, and yeah, it's blasphemy, it's heresy, um, and it's you don't want to be excommunicated, which is a natural self-preservation when you are part of a group, is to preserve your space in that group. And again, I referenced David Hirsch before, and he this idea of position of politics of position versus the politics of reason, and he refers to the community of the good. And it's like you don't want to get kicked out of the community of the good, because it feels good to be in the community of the good, to be one of the good ones, to be on the right side of history, a phrase that we hear way too often. It
Mhm.
feels good. And so that's where I think some of the criticism is valid, of like it makes you feel good to say this. It does. We all feel good to believe that we have the morally superior stance, but you also don't want to lose your space in your little social hierarchy or in your group,
Mhm.
which again was a very like part of pushing me out of my politics, was very literally feeling like I was pushed out of my social circles when I was protesting there was a weekly Friday BLM protest that I went to every week since the George Floyd riots started. Here in Waikiki, there was protests every
Protest,
Friday.
protest.
I would protest. Jason, it's such a quick turnaround. I slept at City Hall in New York City during when this whole thing first broke out in the summer of 2020. Like I flew back to New York because I was like, oh, my city needs me to defend the justice of
I
Black
don't want to
people
be
in America.
I don't want to be disrespectful, but did you ever at any point wear a pussy hat?
I never wore a pussy hat, but only because I didn't have one. I would have. I swear I would have. Um, So okay, yeah. So anyway, I
Uh,
was at these Friday protests here in Hawaii, and then suddenly May 2021 rolls around, and now and I was the one that brought all the signs like that. I was just I it was again I really do cringe at like what I thought was like groundbreaking activism, but I would show up with all of my signs and stuff, and then suddenly in May 2021 there were now signs saying. End Israeli apartheid, Zionism is racism, and so I was just like I'm actually really grateful that I was so confident in my identity in that way, or that I was knowledgeable enough about my people and that country, to not be persuaded by again the people in my group telling me that these things are actually bad.
mhm.
I'm glad that I had the foresight to walk away from that situation and say, wow, if you guys aren't even willing to engage with someone who's been putting in the work and being here with you, then there's something wrong with our side here, right? And that was the big sort of awakening for me. But it was because I got pushed out of the circles I was in, and who wants to do that? Because in these left wing circles, like you were saying, this sort of thought crime, thinking the wrong thing, or God forbid, like you said, saying it out loud and people hear it,
Mhm.
will have consequences.
Mhm. Yeah, it's it's bizarre the parallels, and it seems obvious to me in a way that it's incredible or bizarre that how it's not obvious to the people who we're kind of talking about, the people who this pertains to, the kind of the woke types. Um, and a lot of times I use that term really as a descriptor, although I know it has pejorative connotations. And to kind of signal that I'm not really trying to be pejorative, I'll either explicitly say I don't mean to be pejorative, but or I'll say, the social justice warrior types, which is like a term they use, like a moniker they've used, or the leftist progressive types. I use the term types as a qualifier, like those type of
Mhm.
people. We know who we're talking about.
Mhm.
And there's complexity there too, because there's not, even though there are elements within the group generally of keeping adherence in various social ways, various forms of social pressure to keep fairly strict adherence to certain paradigms and certain, like, I call them presuppositions. It's not as monolithic as it's, I think, attempting to be, because there is variation in, flavors of leftism, let's say. And then you have people who have very different experiences with those kinds of people, and they become kind of quasi disaffected. Like, they still maintain certain values that are associated with progressives and leftist types, that they genuinely still believe in, but because of elements of ostracism, or because of aversion to triggering that upon themselves in certain ways, they'll kind of just keep their opinions to themselves, or they'll kind of keep to
Mhm.
themselves, or they won't broach subject matters that are controversial in a way that could risk those things, even though they actually feel or think a certain way. And so maybe at one point you were like that. And then if you get demonized enough, then there's a certain kind of, it tends to trigger in a person a certain kind of like, well, the hell with it then. I don't want to be a part of your group anyway, because you guys are unreasonable. Like, you're ostracizing me for reasons that don't even make sense. Like, I still care about social justice, or I still care about the downtrodden or marginalized peoples. I just don't care about them in the exact way that you want me to, and I don't agree with every single facet of what you say I should believe, right?
Mhm.
Like I don't think that we should just go around demonizing white people. This is something I genuinely don't agree with when it comes to like wokeness. Like, I don't like this tendency that's actually on Clubhouse, or if a white
Oh.
person comes into the room to speak about social justice issues or racism, that, like, excuse me, you're white passing, therefore your opinion doesn't matter. So we can just discount everything you said, no matter how
Mhm.
knowledgeable, no matter what you're bringing to the table, no matter what your experiences actually are. The fact that you're white means we not only know your opinion, but we know it's not valid. Like
Mhm.
that snap judgment that so many people snap into and ostracize white people and kick them to the audience. And it's like, no, like, I
Mhm.
never allow that in my spaces. Like, I just don't. And I would have people come into me and they use these forms of social pressure to, like, try to check me. Like, are you just gonna
Mhm.
allow this white person to speak in your room about racism? I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm gonna do, because there's nothing
Mhm.
inherently wrong with it. I reject your presuppositions,
Mhm.
right? But the implication is you're immoral for allowing this.
Yes.
You're
Yes.
not on code, and you're anti-black now because you're allowing this white man to speak in your room about
Yes.
racism. It's like, first of all, I don't even know if I agree with him yet, because I haven't heard what he said. If he says something I disagree with, then it's good that he said it so I can disagree with it. But if I
Mhm.
allow the man to speak, I won't be able to evaluate or assess what he thinks and to what extent I agree with it. And if from the point of view of coalition building, this is this like treating people like that doesn't make sense. Like, if you want to build coalitions,
People who say that bullshit are not actually interested in coalition building, though, Jason. Or they're only interested in coalition building with the groups that they deem as part of the community of the good. And again, this is
yeah,
how we've devolved away from this sort of enlightenment thinking of like what matters is a person's sort of, character or thought process and ideas, right? As opposed to, again, these immutable characteristics. But
yeah,
now instead we view people through the lens of like imperialism and colonialism. And so, like, now suddenly, by virtue of like where you were born, if that's an oppressed nation, you're a good person. You are like an
yeah. Or if
inherently
you
like,
or if you have the
you
wrong
know what I
skin
mean?
color, even if you didn't own slaves or have
And
anything to
you're
do
a
with slavery,
bad
you the guilt of your ancestors is laid at your feet, like, you, because you have the same skin color as them. Like, I've never been on board with that. That is very hard to justify morally. And I actually got into a interesting discussion with another black person on Clubhouse, uh, about how collective responsibility is supposed to work when it comes to the history of white oppression of black people. And we were going over it philosophically, because I think he has a background in philosophy and so do I. And my whole stance was, the idea that you would blame all white people or the majority of white people, basically his whole thing was any white person who wasn't actively involved in abolition is basically culpable for oppression of black people. And I'm like, that seems like it goes too far.
Abolition, as in like historical abolition, not like people
Yeah.
today who call themselves
No, no,
abolitionists.
no. Historical abolition is like actual underground railroad abolitionists, because
Right.
there were white people involved and instrumental in that. He's saying any white person short of that, who was caping really, really hard for abolition in Congress or something like that, or was helping people escaping the Underground Railroad, is culpable. And I was just like, that is not a good theory of moral responsibility to lay that at the feet of all of the people who, like, maybe didn't own slaves, because a very small section of the population did, but like in various different ways went along with the norms of the oppressive regime, like we always do. Like we go along with all kinds of norms in the utmost passive ways. To say that we're actively like, to whatever extent we're doing that, and that's enabling pernicious things, that you would lay that at our feet, like, because we do that with capitalism, for example. Like, we go along with capitalism in all kinds of passive ways, and we support it in all kinds of, like, either minimally active ways, like we purchase things that are like built with slave labor or child labor, right? In a certain sense, we're causally enabling things, but like, we're not actively, we're not like, we're going to buy iPhones and we're like, yeah, I love the fact that children made this. Like most of us are, like, either we don't know, or we're just kind of like, I guess, passively accepting of it, of like, it's not really a thought that occurs to us. Like, we just want our iPhone.
I'll
Like,
even take it. I'll even take it like I agree. I agree with that. But even like more in a more similar, um, I'm smiling only because like this is the thing that like both your people are always saying not to do. Don't try to compare slavery and the Holocaust, and I'm not. But what I'm about to say is that
but
an interesting comparison would be like a Jewish perspective of German citizens, right, who were not Nazis, right, but who turned a blind eye, right? And so, like, a Jew could say, like, anyone who didn't actively hide Jews in their attic, it was culpable, right? Anyone who
yeah,
wasn't fighting their government and hiding Jews was culpable.
this is actually something that he argued. The guy I was talking about, he argued literally this point.
There you go, exactly. And so that's the only comparison I'm trying to make here. But I think it's like that is a it's almost just a waste of an exercise. More interesting is the fact that so many, you almost have to go a little deeper. Like, do you believe people are inherently good or inherently evil, right? Or whatever, or is evil possible? But if we're going on the basis of like most people want to do good, have similar values of human life and whatever, it's more interesting to sort of opine on the fact that so many people were bystanders than it is to blame every single person, right? Because
Yeah,
it's too many people to blame. It's only
yeah,
it's a it's a perpetuating, victimhood status to feel aggrieved at every single person. And it's like it's more interesting to discuss the phenomenon than it is to try to place blame on people then, or especially now, generations later.
yeah. I think it's an oversimplification in precisely the way we talked about earlier, which is it's it's it is something that serves the purposes of self-moral aggrandizement, right? Because it's like, nope, it's simple. You either were for it or you were part of the problem, and that's
Mhm.
it. It's binary, and it's ironic coming from the people who deny binary in the gender context, but like everything else is black and
Mhm.
white, except
Totally.
gender.
Well, and
That's
it's
a
also
spectrum. Like, okay,
and it's like what I said before with like everything is just simple. It's simple, right?
yeah, no,
It's not complicated.
except when it serves their purposes, because
Right,
gender
right,
all of a
totally,
sudden isn't simple. Like,
totally.
people used to think of gender as very binary, very simple, but no, that's complex, that's nuanced, and that's supposed to, like, that enables all of
How
these
about
maneuvers of
we're only
justification.
evidence based and follow the science, and yet our belief in this gender ideology is someone's soul.
No, because science in this context, because it's convenient for my arguments, is oppressive and transphobic.
But do people even say that? I think people more so just lie about the science and point to the shitty science, the Jack Turbins
No,
of the
yeah,
world.
because it's
Say like,
more
oh,
it's
look
more
what he
it's
said.
because it's more convincing and it's more consistent with other
More
views that
consistent.
they have. So for
Exactly, with
example,
the
it's
being
really
follow the science crowd.
right. Like, so for example, if you're gonna be gung ho rah rah about climate change and you're gonna be like pro science, or you're gonna be like pro vaccine because pro science, but then you turn around and be like science is oppressive in the context, like that's such an obvious contradiction that it's actually going to like have a net negative impact on persuading people to join your causes. So what they do is they obfuscate science in a way and then present only cherry picked data that
Mhm.
supposedly is science based, that hey, gender affirming care is regarded by this official medical institution as doing X, Y, and Z positive things. Follow the science. Now I feel like I'm consistent because I've
Right.
evoked the authoritativeness of this scientific body without ever having to delve into the scientific details at all,
Mhm.
because I don't even
Mhm.
need to understand them. All I need to do is go, such and such official scientific
Says it.
body deems
Says
X
so.
the
Yeah.
case. And then people go, but that all you're doing is appealing to authority. And then it's just like transphobe. And that shuts the conversation down. Like, you're not even
Mhm.
allowed to even ask for details because that must be motivated by malevolent intent. Right. Like that. I've like this game has been played so many times with me and other people on Clubhouse and elsewhere that it's like I could make these arguments better than them now because I'm so used to it now. This is like, and I've actually kind of like, in a quasi trolly way, have like assumed the position of that. It's just kind of like made these arguments in rooms to the point where people were like, "Wait, whose side are you on?"
Yeah. But
And
again, I
I'm
think
like,
that's a really great quality that people have to question what your views are because you are able to really
the
command the
trolley
opposite
part, I
perspective.
think, is the trolley part is not. It could undermine what I'm trying to accomplish. So, cause like sometimes, like legit, what I'm doing is I'm like subversively trolling. I'm like embodying to a high degree of fidelity what a person actually says
You
to
gotta
to to,
feed
uh,
the
to
troll every once
almost
in a
to
while.
almost no, but the point of it is like this is ridiculous to a lot of people, and I'm embodying the ridiculousness to kind of demonstrate the ridiculousness, but
Mhm.
I'm doing it with a straight face. And to a certain extent, even though it may be satisfying to do, like there's a certain sense in which that's not good faith because I'm not really serious. I'm just pretending to be serious. So I keep that to an absolute minimum, particularly
Mhm.
when it comes to the trans issues, because a lot of people who I think are actually saying ridiculous things, they mean it. And that's not trivial. Like, you need to take into account their sincerity. And I
Yeah.
think that when I get trolly, I'm failing to take into account their sincerity.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And I'm playing around in a way that undermines like my credibility. Like, once they discover I'm trolling, then they're not gonna want to engage with me anymore. And so that's a missed opportunity. So I have a critique of myself when I don't do that really anymore, but I've done it a couple of times and I'm like, yeah, this doesn't feel right. I probably shouldn't do this anymore. So there's
You know,
that.
it's interesting because like with the gender stuff, with the trans stuff specifically, um so much of like what we're of the reason not to delve into this stuff is the idea that it's going to hurt someone more so than the science of like it, biological physiological, right? Really most of it comes down to like people will be like, I guess, upset and then sad and then become depressed and then become
I think the most steelman version is that it's going to contribute to suicidal ideation, which is actually a very serious risk and a very realistic risk. So that's the most steelman version of the
it's
perspective.
no, it's a serious risk.
Yeah.
It's not. I would quibble with how realistic it is. The statistics on suicidal intent and ideation for gender nonconforming people um, are really overstated in a dangerous way, in the same way that it is dangerous to repeat the false claim that Black people are being hunted down in the streets of America by police officers. Now, why is that a dangerous false claim to make? Because it's going to, it could, at least one implication could be to put Black people on edge and have them living in a heightened, sense of fear when maybe it's not actually warranted, and that is certainly can be deleterious to someone's
An
health.
and unwilling, and there's a lot. Yeah, you're right. I agree. And an
And so telling
unwillingness,
trans people
an
that you're
unwillingness to call the police when they need to be called
there you go. There you
would
go.
be an example of that. Yeah.
But so telling people, like you're gonna kill yourself if you don't get the transition. That trans people have these high rates of suicidality and depression. It can, and the
Is
same thing
but
goes to,
it's
I think. Sorry, I'll make this just one more point that's a little different, but like this idea of when I was focusing on microaggressions against gay people, I felt much more aggrieved. I felt much more victimized because I was being primed to take these things that could be that if you're generous with the other person, may not have been their intent may have been pure. But if you take all of these things as slights, you're actually going to be worse off. And
mhm.
again, this is kind of stuff that did you read The Coddling of the American Mind?
Excerpts.
Well, add it to your list.
I have a general understanding of what it's about, but
Yeah,
I'm not in any way like read up on it.
right. But yeah, I mean, so it's like that's actually not helpful to overblow serious things like this, like
Yeah,
suicidality or like murder
yeah.
rates.
You can basically generate, you know, and maybe this word is not the right word to use, but something gesturing towards paranoia, where people's
Hmm.
perception of danger is not in accordance with the actual threat of
Hmm.
danger. Um, and paranoia is a more extreme case of that. It's something very specific in psychology, but like the colloquial understanding of paranoia, where you have an irrational fear,
Hmm.
right? Like it's not rational because it's not grounded in the actuality of the
Like
threat.
cognitive distortion, that would be
Yeah.
probably the more proper term. Yeah.
And if people are operating in the world like that, then they're operating in the world that's like not based in reality, and there's a kind of inadvertent delusion that's cultivated amongst certain people who buy into these things. Um, and so yeah, there is a kind of loose harm there, but I think that it is sensible though to have a certain adjusted level of concern with the relationship between how we discuss trans issues in our discourse, how trans people are treated by the general public, and their dispositions towards experiences of suicidal ideation or the exacerbation of the gender dysphoria which leads to that in the first place, right? Like that's not a trivial thing. There are relationships there. Saying that the
Hmm.
relationships are overblown doesn't deny the relationships. It's just saying that they're exaggerated, but we still should be wary of not making the mistake in the opposite direction of underestimating the threat, right? So like there's got to be a calibration there, and that's like as far as I'm willing to go with the trans activist types. Like there is some thing to be worried about because there is a population that is particularly prone for suicidal ideation because their genuine experience
There
of gender dysphoria matters. But like if
again,
we're
I
not
think I
allowed
don't know
also,
how much I agree with that premise, but I get what you're saying. Like I think that's actually not true. I think that
you don't
I'll
think that
send
it's
you
it's true that people who experience gender dysphoria are disproportionately likely to have suicidal ideation?
correct. So there's also there's a big distinction in the literature and in practice of what is suicidal ideation versus like suicidal intent, and they are different for a reason because they tell you different things. And so, for example, when I was studying clinical psychology and we would do psychological assessments on children, I worked in a children's clinic, and we asked them questions about suicidality. Um, and under a certain threshold, you're not making a safety plan and alerting people's parents. It is normal for people to have morbid thoughts. um, it is less common for people to think of a plan, right? When there are certain things that take it out of a category of sort of ideation, but ideation is really common. And from what I've read, there's an article that goes over a bunch of studies that was super helpful in this. I should see if I can find it and bring it up so we can share it. with the people. But no, I think this the rates are like slightly more elevated than like gay and lesbian people.
Mm-hmm.
And I also don't know that we can prove that that is like what that can be attributed to. Is it attributed to the gender dysphoria, like you were saying, like this experience of feeling incongruence with your body and how you want to be perceived in the world, um,
Well,
or is it for
okay.
some other reason?
Well, let me delve into this real quick, and then we're gonna get back into hate speech because I like to be loose because I like conversations to be organic.
Mm-hmm.
So I medical news today, and I welcome any feedback about the trustworthiness or lack thereof of this source. But the title reads: Transgender teens 7.6 times more likely to attempt suicide. Bullet points: Suicide is the fourth largest cause of death among 15 to 19-year-olds worldwide. Researchers from the University of Ottawa found transgender and non-binary Canadian teens have a higher risk of thinking about and attempting suicide compared to their cisgender heterosexual peers. Scientists believe their research shows the need for better support for gender minority youth. So those are kind of the hot bullet points of this
Yeah.
article. You probably so the study recently appeared in the Canadian. So the maybe this is a link to the study here that we can look at. Let's see. Or this is just the journal. Suicidality among sexual minority and transgender adolescents, a nationally represented population-based study of youth in Canada. So this is actually the hold on 1 second. This is actually I'm gonna put it in the chat for you so that you can see it. But yeah, so this is actually the study here. Um, so for this study, researchers conducted a population-based study analyzing data from 20 Canadian Health Survey on children and youth. The sample included 6,800 teens, 15 to 17, with 99.4% identifying as cisgender and 0.6% transgender. So
Okay.
0.6% of 6,800. Oh, I gotta do.
That
Can you
is
do that? Can you do that
that's the
math real
first
quick?
problem, I would say.
Well, isn't that consistent with the amount of trans in the population? So wouldn't this count as a random sample? It's less than one
So
percent of the population. Well, this is Canada, but
okay,
I assume it's
that's a good point. I think we don't quite actually know what the prevalence rates of transgender identity are, but no, that's a good point. You want a representative study. Um, I would need to. So in the article about this study, it said 90 whatever percent of trans youth have thought about or attempted. A lot of the research that will talk about suicidality among trans youth, I don't even really quite like that ideology, but um, will collapse those two categories, right? Suicidal ideation and suicide attempt. And again, they are just for people who are in the psychological community, they are distinct. You would have a different responsibility as a licensed psychologist, as a mandated reporter, right? You have a different responsibility to a child if they tell you like, sometimes I'm really sad and I wish I could sleep forever and I don't want to be alive anymore, or if they tell you, my mom has a bottle of pills and I know that on Friday nights when she's not home I could get it. You would have a different responsibility to act in those scenarios, and so I think collapsing them is actually not helpful in
but well,
understanding.
what bearing even if we take into account the validity in not collapsing those two categories, what bearing does that have on the veracity of the claim that people who experience gender dysphoria are disproportionately more likely to have suicidal ideation and or make the attempt, right? So even in that claim, I preserved the categorical distinctions that you
Right.
just. Are you saying that that's still not true?
So, well, what I am saying is that I think that those numbers are closer to lesbian and gay people, for example, so perhaps higher than the general population. Um,
Okay.
yeah, and I think Oh, I had another question.
About the study.
Yeah, but I don't remember what it was. I'm trying to, for some reason, my internet, I don't know if it's like working hard on having this window open, but it's not really, I'm trying to pull up this other thing. Let's see.
No worries. Um,
But yeah,
well,
sorry, continue.
I was gonna say when if you come up with the question, let me know and I'll try to go from there. But I think, and I'm not an expert at all, and you seem to be more familiar with the psychological literature than me because it seems like you've studied it formally in a way that I never have. Closest thing I ever got to psychology was I used to watch Oxford University used to have like these they're almost like podcasts, but they're like they ended up on YouTube, and you can literally watch videos of lectures. And one of them was Psychology 101, and I used to it was either Yale or Oxford, one of those. Um, and I used to watch that, and I thought it was fascinating. But I just did that in my own spare time, and I used to just read random stuff about psychology, and I also liked philosophy of mind. And a lot of the people from the psychology department at undergrads would take philosophy of mind classes with me uh, in college. So that was the closest I have. I kind of dabbled with some
Yeah.
of the concepts. Um, but that's and then I have like child psychology, child development books that were a part of my uh learning to be a teacher.
Mm.
And so I know very surface level things about Piaget and different theories of learning. um but yeah, that's not really saying much.
So I do remember my question. It was just going to be, did they discuss like comorbidities in the study?
In the actual study, let's see, I can go to the study and maybe see if I can find an abstract.
It would be good to know too what were there's just usually more information that's necessary, right? So is this
There's a
taking into account comorbidities? Is it taking into account like an ACE score, right? Like adverse childhood events.
So
Um,
background: very little research has described risk of suicide ideation and suicide attempt among transgender youth using high quality, nationally representative data. We aim to assess risk of suicidality among transgender sexual minority adolescents in Canada. Um, Methods: we analyze a subsample of adolescents aged 15 to 17 years from 2019 Canadian Health Survey. Sorry, my Lakers are playing and it's a
no,
very
it's
close
okay.
game.
You
Uh,
can if you can you scroll a little down?
Yeah, but I'm gonna read it. Sorry for the
Okay,
audience.
for the
I'm just
audience,
like
yeah.
distracted by a very close game. The Lakers might lose. All right. We define participants' transgender identity, self-reported gender different from sex assigned at birth. Sorry. And sexual minority status, self-reported attraction to people of same gender as exposures, and their self-reported previous year suicidal ideation and lifetime suicide attempts as outcomes. Results: we included 6,800 adolescents aged 15 to 17 years, including 1130, 16.5% who indicated some degree of same gender attraction, 265, 4.3% who were unsure of their attraction, and 50, 0.6% who reported as transgender identity. So that's only 50 people. Compared with cisgender heterosexual adolescents, transgender adolescents showed 5 times the risk of suicidal ideation, 95% confidence interval, and 7.6 times the risk of suicide attempt. Among cisgender adolescents, girls attracted to girls had 3.6 times the risk of previous year suicide ideation and 3.3 times the risk of having ever attempted suicide compared with their heterosexual peers. Adolescents attracted to multiple genders had 2.5 times the risk of suicide ideation and 2.8 times the risk of suicide attempt. Youth questioning their sexual orientation had twice the risk of having attempted suicide in their lifetime. Interpretation. Uh, we observe
So
the transgender health. Sorry, go ahead.
no, if you want to keep reading for the audience, please continue.
We observed that transgender and sexual minority adolescents were at increased risk of suicide ideation and attempted compared with an attempt compared with their cisgender heterosexual peers. These findings highlight the need for inclusive prevention approaches to address suicidality among Canadian diverse youth population. Um, Transgender youth are those whose gender identity does not match their sex assigned at birth, among other terms, gender nonconforming. So this is just like terminology and stuff.
Mhm.
But yeah, so to me, and this is not the only study of its kind, but I've read abstracts of studies that basically have this similar conclusion, which is that they're disproportionately higher than other groups in the population, including other members of the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have a few thoughts. Like, on the one hand, I don't even want to come across like I'm fighting this so much because to a certain extent of sort of like face validity, like it would make sense for life to be harder, right? If you feel this devastating incongruence with your identity and how other people are perceiving you. Um, that makes a lot of sense. You're also going to face bigotry, like so those things make sense.
Mm-hmm.
My skepticism is like threefold, maybe more. I mean, I think it's important with these studies also to look at the actual items. And so sometimes you'll look at a scale and see the types of questions that they're asking. And I think that could be important. Now, one of the things that makes these conversations hard too is because who has the time to go through every study like this? And you then could be accused also of sort of nuance mongering, right? Like, well, why are you're trying to act like it's not important just because you might quibble with the wording over certain items. But that stuff is important, and methodological limitations are like oftentimes overlooked when we just kind of take for granted the results of a study.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be curious on what the actual items were and like how they would correct for any internal inconsistencies in scoring or in answering certain items.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's there's an issue with the categories they're giving, and without going like way too deep down the rabbit hole, they say something like we compared like transgender people to cisgender and heterosexual people. You're now comparing apples and oranges, which I guess I did before as well when I was saying like, well, their outcomes might be more similar to lesbian and gay people, but like within the transgender community, you're also going to have gay people and straight people. And by the way, those labels are highly controversial because there's the sort of official typology of homosexual, transsexual, and AGP autogynephilia of being the sort of heterosexual and homosexual versions of trans identity, which are the opposite of how we are told we as a society are told that we have to refer to someone's sexuality. So for example, if there's a trans woman who is attracted to women, we are to refer to her as a lesbian, even though under the typology of trans identity, that person would be considered heterosexual because sex is um, well, sex is binary, right? And you're talking about their attraction based on their sex and not their gender. And so I just think a lot of this stuff, yeah, I would need more information. I don't know why it won't let me open up. Like I can open up new tabs, but it won't let me search anything. It's like giving me a fail error. So if I can
Okay.
find it after, I'll send it to you. And if you're interested in it, you can, I don't know, like add it to the notes or something.
I'm
It,
always interested in learning. Yeah, you can send it to me. That's fine. And we don't necessarily have to settle it. It was more like let's start the conversation today.
yeah,
Um, and it was just a study. I've found studies like that before. I've never found that particular study. It doesn't pertain to the United States. There's things that we can balk at, and I welcome all of that. I'm not going to be like, hey, this study settles it because I don't think that's the right approach to studies. But it was more like I was actually in some sense taken aback, not in a like pearl clutchy way, but just like genuinely kind of like, oh, I didn't expect that for you to object to that because I feel like that's just common knowledge. I feel like people on both sides agree with
it's
that part.
it's common knowledge in that it's like one of the most so here I think is why I take such objection and why I also think it just needs to, if anything, be gone. You need to go through with a fine
Fine
tooth
tooth
comb. Is
comb.
that how you
Yeah.
say it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, because it's not a small thing. Obviously, right, suicidality should be taken seriously, right? We don't want people to kill themselves. Dead people is a bad thing and is a problem that we should discuss. But that's like one of the biggest talking points in this issue, right? One of the common refrains that you'll hear is, do you want a trans kid or a dead kid? And so this I think it's fear mongering. I think that's why I take I'm so sensitive to that type of conversation, is because I think we're never really talking about it in fine enough detail. And again, I should have prepped on. I didn't know we were going to go down this road, so I would have reread,
Mm-hmm.
some of the things and touched up on this.
We're
But
gonna
I
have to
think
do another. We're gonna have to do
I know,
another episode.
but I think it's just it's a big tool in their toolkit of forcing you to conform to that belief, because again, it's evil of you to want someone to kill themselves. So if you not giving in to someone's demands or not agreeing with someone's perception is going to lead them to kill themselves, that's obviously pretty serious, and I don't think it's realistic or helpful.
Well, I understand about the fear mongering point, and I actually genuinely disagree with you on this though. I think the part I agree with is, to whatever extent anyone is guilty of fear mongering on this issue, that actually is not helpful, and I think that part I agree with. I don't know that the most steelman version of this position necessarily means that you're fear mongering. I think that there's a legitimate concern to be had about the disproportionately higher likelihood that people of this particular demographic uh, has to either consider or actually attempt suicide,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, like, that's like that part is preserved, and there are ways to exaggerate that risk, but you need not exaggerate the risk to acknowledge that it is a risk and that the risk is disproportionately higher for that group of people. Once you have that, that's enough to warrant maybe special attentiveness to it, right? So if I knew that a certain population was disproportionately more likely for a bad thing to occur to them, right? Paying more attention to that population makes more sense because you want to be vigilant, right? I think that's the basic logic. And yes, that logic does get exaggerated, and that exaggeration is harmful for the ultimate goals, right? But like, I'm I would caution you of being. Oh,
Sorry. I have a ghost light, so it just turns itself on and
okay,
off
okay, no
sometimes.
worries. I was like, oh no, I thought your power went out, but I was
No,
like, you're
no,
still on the stream, so like
yeah,
we're good.
it's just my light.
Uh, but yeah, so I'm my worry is that if that your concern or a person's concern similar to yours, that there's fear mongering going on, could make you not properly attentive to the danger itself, right?
Yeah.
um so that would be my worry. But like, I don't think that you are are oblivious to or are ignoring the worry. I think that you're just trying to make sure that it's not being exaggerated. Is that fair?
Yes, and I think this is a can of worms, and we should have another conversation about this. Um, I think also this group, even that we're calling trans youth, that these surveys are looking at,
Mhm.
is a contrived demographic.
In what
Um,
sense?
so there are people who take issue with, and the more, I guess, I tend to lean into this group, take issue even with the terminology of like trans children, right? The idea is like, this is a child with gender dysphoria, right? Or
Yeah,
with gender incongruence, and
yeah.
like making them instead a politicized identity group in some way is interesting. And also, this is very new. So, for example, a lot of another issue I take with not even necessarily the studies, but the way that they are weaponized in our discourse is that a lot of times these studies are used as proof of why we need more gender affirming care, right? Look at these trans youth are more likely to kill themselves, and so we need to affirm and get them on
Puberty blockers
puberty
and etc.
blockers, right? All these things. And then you have other studies that show very clearly that for many people who do transition, at post transition, they have sometimes even higher rates of suicidality and depression. And
Yeah.
so the insinuation that we actually just need to affirm more does not, we're not actually then targeting this depression suicidality piece here. That's sort of first of all. Second of all, the way that we treat these groups has or in a similar vein, the way that we treat these groups has changed. It's very interesting that we're going to say like huge percentages of these people are suicidal or going to attempt suicide when a few decades ago, before we were intervening on children medically at all, most children would desist. They would grow out of the extreme discomfort. And most children or most adults who had experienced even severe gender dysphoria as a child, and by most I mean more than 80% in most of the studies that looked at this, grew up to be gay. They grew up to be a lesbian, like maybe a butch woman or an effeminate gay man. And most of them, even if they still experience gender dysphoria, like lots of lesbians do, lots of lesbians like don't take their sports bra off, right? Like certain parts of them might make them feel uncomfortable, but they still identify as a woman, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or they still are aware of being female. And so we're like, how was it that we had all of these people desisting and growing into, gay adults and hopefully well-adjusted adults, and now suddenly when we're intervening they're all suicidal? And I don't say that to be conspiratorial, because I heard that sounding that way when I said it. And again, I don't think that
I don't.
there's nefarious intent, but
I
I
don't. I
think
don't think you're being conspiratorial. I think you're asking. I think you're asking questions that are fair, but are clearly the kinds of questions that would not be allowed
right.
in the way that we were talking about before. Um, that would be the kind of thing that would be considered hate speech.
Yeah.
And now we come full circle to what we were supposed to be talking about this whole entire 2 hours, but we barely touched, right? Because the basic idea is that broaching that subject matter or in any way, shape, or form, like suggesting the idea that deviates from the kind of orthodoxy of like, nope, trans youth is a thing, and if there's something ridiculous about you if you don't believe that because science
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, right? Like that's kind of the attitude. So I understand you're asking I think some controversial questions, but not to be trolly and not to hurt anybody, because they you're trying to figure out what the hell is going on, right? So I get
And
that.
because I
Do
have
you do
a
you
vested interest as like a gay person, that I
That
think,
was exactly what I was going to ask you. You didn't say it
yeah.
explicitly, and I didn't know how comfortable you were. But I also saw your PTR, so I kind of.
Yeah.
Is it you and your wife
Yes,
in your
it is.
PTR?
Yeah.
So I didn't want to put you on blast or out you or nothing, but I was kind of like, yeah,
Mhm.
I kind of do. So no, but I get it though, and you're not the only member of the LGBTQ plus community who's voiced these kinds of things, and there's this dynamic of like, you're a part of the in group, but you're expected to be, so to speak, in alignment, because there's all this
Oh yeah.
vested interest, and we have to be on the same page, and we have to ride for our people, so to speak. And if you're not doing it in a particular way according to this kind of orthodoxy, then you're so to speak a traitor to your own people, right? And
Totally.
I get this kind of thing with respect to my people, with black people, the black community. It's like, I'm not willing to jump on board with the whole, the thing I said earlier, which is white person in a clubhouse room, they want to speak on race issues, they're not saying the things that are approved by the woke. And are you black man who's running the room with the mod badge? Are you not going to leverage your power in the microcosm of this space to like put that white man in check? are you gonna like, and if you're not willing to do that, then you're not, then you're anti-black, then you're a coon, etc.
Mhm.
Like I've heard that shit so many times, and it's like I don't buy into it, so I don't believe it, but like people do genuinely believe that that's what's occurring, right? And so there's social
Totally.
pressure, unless I want to be ostracized by my own community, or at least a subset of my community, right? That I have to conform with the expectation, right? Or else I face various forms of ostracism, I get made fun of, etc. The thing about me is that I have managed to create some kind of draw in my spaces where I'm not so easily discounted or ostracized, because I
Hmm.
attract attention in a way that undermines that goal. But if you got enough people who were motivated enough to attack me or deplatform me or cancel me or whatever, then I'm sure I could be ostracized in a more effective way where now nobody wants to talk to me. But it's really hard to keep reasonable people from like investigating that for themselves. And if they talk to me long enough,
Hmm.
they're going to find out, hey, I've been lied to about this person. This person
Yeah.
is not evil and malevolent like I've been told, right? Like, so I don't want to rant too much, but
No, that was the experience. Yes, and again, what you just said was the experience that I had when I sort of said like, "Oh, everyone was calling me conservative, so let me go find out what these conservatives are saying." It was like the first time I heard Ben Shapiro.
can you
Really,
be gay and conservative? Is that allowed?
yeah, there's lots of them, and again, and
No, I know.
I'm not like I'm a liberal.
Yeah.
That's where I am. I've only ever voted on the left. Like I don't. We'll see. It would really depend on who the matchup is. If it's Rashida Tlaib, versus fucking Ron DeSantis, then maybe I'm voting for Ron DeSantis. But
Oh, that's conservative talk right there.
yeah, but
I got to record it. I'm gonna
yeah,
blackmail you now.
no, seriously. But uh,
I mean, full disclosure, I voted for Trump in 2020.
yeah, no,
So I guess
which,
we're both conservatives,
oh my
according by that
goddamn
standard.
conservative, Jason. No, but you know, what the hell? Where was I going with this? What I wanted to respond to what you were saying about being ostracized by the in group and whatever. That is very true. In many ways, I'm not out about this. Like when you asked me in the beginning, do you want to have your last name? A big reason is because I'm still flirting with talking openly about a lot of these things. And in many ways, my political evolution, ideological evolution, the gender stuff was the very last piece that I got to because I was the most afraid to interrogate those claims. That felt like the holiest, the one that I was really not. If I'm still a good person, if I'm someone who has become more moderate but is still, then I couldn't question that. That was the last thing I got to. Well, one of the things that makes it really hard to talk about any of this stuff, and why I'm nervous too, is I have I have so many Black friends. Like I have trans friends,
That
and
was a microaggression.
I
I am
know,
appalled and offended.
you're welcome. But like I have a non-insignificant being a gay person in these types of circles. Like I have a non-insignificant number of friends or friends of friends or partners of friends who are trans. And I sincerely don't want to hurt them. Many of them I love very dearly and respect and would never misgender or use their, non-preferred name or anything like that.
Dead name, yeah.
Yeah. Um, so that's what makes these conversations really difficult. And yeah, I would never want someone to be hurt by what I'm saying, even though I really believe, I know it's in good faith. And I believe that I think I'm probably, again, I'm flirting with saying the right side of history, and I don't want to say that, but that's ultimately what I'm trying to say. I think there's a bit of a medical scandal going on.
I think maybe a better way to say it is you're trying to do the right thing as best as you see it.
Yeah,
And there is a risk that the way you see it is wrong, but
yes,
you're willing to take on the risk because you genuinely see it a certain way, and you're open-minded enough to investigate and question yourself. But that's
yeah,
the best a person can do.
hmm,
And I agree with that, and I feel analogous with respect to my identities and my community that's built off of that identity. So there's I think why we're getting along so much is because there's a parallel here,
Hmm.
with respect to very different sets of identities, but there's still parallels.
Right.
Um, and the cultural milieu that we're kind of discussing and we've kind of had our own set of experiences with has put us in positions to have to feel like in many ways we have to choose between loyalty or fealty to our communities
Totally.
and loyalty and fealty to our own conscience.
Hmm.
Like we can't have it both ways. And
Hmm.
like in many ways I resent the left for that. And this is kind of like a bias maybe I have against the left is I resent that they have made me feel that I have to choose between two things that I equally value. I
Hmm.
value my community. I love the people in my community. I don't always agree with people in my community, but I do value, and I don't want to be ostracized from my community at all. And I
Hmm.
don't want to do or say anything that hurts Black people because I
Yeah.
value my community. But things are that like I am being misperceived or misconstrued as having malevolent intent because I'm saying what I actually believe to be true,
Hmm.
insofar as what I actually believe to be true doesn't conform with what is implied that I have to conform to. And I resent that because like there's nothing
Hmm.
about being a part of my community that means I have to think a certain way. I reject that entirely. But that's the implication of these norms. It's like you must think a certain way in order to bring about certain conceptions of positive change for your community. And you have to literally sacrifice your own your own sense of morality in order to ironically in this weird catch 22 hold to a sense of communal morality, right? Like this is all like moral dimensions, and so it's quite a dilemma, and it's quite
Hmm.
like anxiety inducing. You know what I mean? Like, and so
Hmm.
when you talk about it, how it interacts with your identities, like
Yeah.
I feel it viscerally, even though it doesn't apply. You know, I'm not, for example, a lesbian Jewish person,
You
but like
you're not.
no,
Are you sure?
I'm not. But I have been called. Somebody told me I look like Whoopi Goldberg one time, and I thought that was like equally parts hilarious and offensive. I was offended,
Karen
but
Elaine Johnson.
I couldn't stop laughing. And now it's more offensive now because she's anti-Semitic. This is before the anti-Semitic days.
Yeah.
This was
Yeah.
like 8 years ago. But yeah, okay, we got to talk about hate speech because that's what we told people we are going to talk about.
Yeah.
We've been dancing around and talking about related issues. We said we had a working definition. Um,
Yes.
we can spend. I mean, I have time, but I'll let you determine how long this goes. But I do want to concentrate on that, and we're also going to work in Kanye and Kyrie. But
Hmm.
so so the discourse on hate speech, I think, to steel man is somewhat, and this is kind of where we started, is I think fundamentally about cultivating norms of behavior, almost like a social etiquette or social mores, or maybe conscientiousness, um, around language, such that you don't say either inadvertently or intentionally anything that will offend or cause any kind of harm to people based on immutable characteristics. I think that that's like the best good faith summary of where the I would say benevolent intent is, right? It's fundamentally about protecting people from certain kinds of harm induced by certain kinds of language use. But the language use is in some sense amorphous and unclear because there's a lot of ways to use language in a way that is rooted in considerations about people who have been historically marginalized or people's based on their immutable characteristics that could lead to the person to feel negative emotion or could lead to that person to feel aggressed in some way, micro or macro, or could lead to that person actually receiving harm in the actual world, like harassment and bullying, or something that would make them feel so dejected that they actually might consider committing suicide if it happens over time. Death by a thousand cuts. That's the basic idea, right? And there's something I think intuitively appealing about that idea because I think on some level, most people recognize that words can do harm in general. Like broadly speaking, words can hurt people, right? The ways in which words can hurt people, though, are very complex, though. And so that's where we start getting in the weeds. And to what extent do you want to have the government involved in
Right.
particular in outlawing or disallowing and enforcing with the full weight of the government certain kinds of speech, or enforcing the prohibition of certain kinds of speech.
Mm-hmm.
In a country such as ours, that's a deeply controversial thing to even go down that road, because we have a very robust legal tradition that is rooted in all of the good reasons why the government should not be curtailing people's speech. And if
Yeah.
the government is behind a lot of the things that we've been talking about how kind of the cultural milieu of the left effectively ends up like insisting that people self-censor in order to conform to a certain set of norms, if the government has the full weight of the government behind that, there's something particularly tyrannical that's going to manifest itself pretty quickly. And that's the discourse, right? How
Mm-hmm.
can we weigh those interests? Because I actually genuinely believe, despite all my disagreements with the leftists, that there is something to this idea of we want to protect people from harm that can come from the ways in which people use language, particularly in social media spaces where there's a lot of damage that can be done to certain groups of people. So I'm gonna stop there because I'm ranting. What do you think about all of that?
Yeah. Ugh, gosh, so many things. I think so many things of what you just said. Protect is an interesting word. Um, Protect people like from what is it? Discomfort that we're talking. It's interesting that in a little earlier in this in what you just said, you were talking about how words can hurt, and I almost thought you were making a joke because the age old saying is sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, and we've lost touch with that. Um, we've lost touch with a few things. The idea that like
But I think words can hurt though. You don't
they
think words can
can.
hurt?
No, they can. And so, of course, that was never true. But that was not supposed to be said as a statement of fact. It was like a statement of like personal aspiration is the wrong word. But you know, it's almost what it's saying is sticks and stones may break my bones, but I will not allow words to hurt me or something, right? Or like I will
It's more like a
recognize.
it's more like a declaration. Like it's
Yes.
like a mentality.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
again, I think the ideal is somewhere in the middle. Our language has evolved so much. You know, there's been this room for like 3 days now about social justice warriors, right, on Clubhouse, and I've been thinking about how like social just all of these it's obviously used as a pejorative, and for a lot of these words like woke, I know woke is different in that it's sort of like one meaning or origin rather, I guess, sort of like within the Black American community, and it's taken on from a similar definition but a different meaning in the sort of mainstream. But all these words are used in a pretty derogatory way now.
Yes.
And I think back to the word like PC, and I think it's all kind of an evolution. There was being politically correct, which I was always proud to be like, yes, I'm PC, and there's nothing wrong with that. That, of course, was also made into a pejorative. It's like, it's lame to be PC.
Like
But I
PC
almost,
Principal from South Park.
yeah, I think we almost need to go back to like being PC instead of calling things hate speech. You know what I mean? Because there's a difference in saying like, I want to be politically correct. I want to say things that I want to, if if my goal is not to offend, I want to be intentional and careful with my words so that I can express my message, not censor myself, but do my best like not to offend. I think that's different than saying if you say something, it is hate. It is hate speech, right? And attributing this charged connotation to something. I think it's not always, if you're trying to change someone's mind or bring them to the table, that's not the most effective way to do it. Telling them that they're being hateful, calling someone a bigot. Um,
But it's supposed to convey, among other things,
the severity.
yeah. I think that there are people who genuinely think of what is being done is harmful to a level of egregiousness that warrants that language. They don't think of themselves as exaggerating at all. They think of themselves as genuinely and correctly identifying like harm, like
So I
substantive,
didn't even use the
non-trivial harm.
word. I didn't even use the word exaggerate because I wasn't. I'm not even really trying to like prove intent there. I think just in a pragmatic, if you're trying to change someone's mind, right? There like, what is it? You get more. What is it with honey, sugar, something?
More flies with honey than shit or something like
Like,
that.
yeah, there you go. Although that can't be true. Flies love shit, but um, yeah, I mean, and this goes back to you got to read The Coddling of the American Mind, but it's also just like, even if things are harmful, even if words hurt, which you're right, they do. I get hurt all the time on Clubhouse. Just the other day, I spoke up for the first time in like a very long time, and I was like, wow, I should never do that again because people are assholes. And if you don't have, the right audience or whatever, like you can get hurt, and if you whatever. So I agree that words can hurt, but I also think that it's
Well, like
really
when people say things that are disparaging against Jews, doesn't that trigger you in a particular way?
totally, totally, and in
So
fact,
when Kanye West, because I've been trying to work him in for like 2 hours,
do it.
when he said what he said, how did you feel? Be honest. And he said and did a lot of things actually
Yeah,
over an extended period of time,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
the
There's no one thing to
culmination of
really
it,
point to.
yeah, like I mean, you can walk me through it. Like when Kanye West did X, how did you feel? And you can walk me through like his progression in his devolution to anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I mean, Kanye, we're in a weird position with the Kanye thing because he went Hitler on us. Like, he made a cartoon of anti-Semitism. It's like,
Yeah.
it's the sort of saying within the Jewish community. There's this idea of like, we don't talk about left-wing anti-Semitism. We talk about it on the right because it's more obvious. People doing Nazi salutes, it's easy to condemn them, right? It's very easy to point that out as bigotry, and have it be acknowledged and accepted as such.
Mm-hmm.
The upsetting part, really, about the Kanye stuff to me is the response from the citizenry, my peers and my fellow Americans, whether it's in the comment section, whether it's when he's doing one of these dumbass tweets and then you read the replies and it's a bunch of people being like, yeah, like expose them, like get like, oh wait, people agree with this, like people are thinking this is like good, or getting on Clubhouse, after this shit and then seeing rooms of like, why the reaction to Kanye West is anti-blackness. And it's like, he's talking about loving Hitler and I'm getting accused of being anti-black for calling it out. I mean, this is like ridiculous. That's the stuff for me. Same thing really with the Kyrie thing. Like, I'm less offended that Kyrie Irving thinks that, he's the real Jew and that I'm like some Khazar fake person. And I'm more concerned about thousands of
You're
people in
you're
purple
you're a
shirts.
knockoff. You're a knockoff Jew.
Yeah, exactly.
You're a
Exactly.
Kirkland brand Jew.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that bad? I'm sorry. I say it in jest. I don't want to. I don't
Oh,
want to
no,
be.
no, Jason. No, no. Yeah, no, it's funny. That's fine. That's
Why do I get along so well with Jews? Like I genuinely
you
now it's like a
do.
question. I don't even have like a. It's not conscious. I just all of a sudden I'm just like, hey, there's some
No,
people
and
in
it's
here that
not
happen to be
just you.
Jewish, but they're totally cool. Like I'm cool
It's
with them. They're
not
cool with
just
me.
you. Well, what I think is interesting too about Jews, and it goes back to the sort of like questioning things. There's on Clubhouse Jews from like very very different political persuasions,
Hmm.
and like we all kind of congregate together. I'm sure the same like could be said in the black, in the black community, but I always feel weird even comparing those two things because the Jewish community worldwide is 15 million and the black community in America is 45 million. And so when people would say things like, I think that's actually part of the conspiracy of like, how do the Jews get on code? Like when Kanye did this, like they were all on code. It was this, we're done, we're canceling him, we're doing this. It's because there's less of us is part of it. in the way that I see it. Like there's like fewer people to get on board, really, and so it's easier to wrangle, you know, a few animals than a whole bunch. But
I think the question is more about your connection to power and political influence. I think my community, there are people who, and I want to be very, I want to proceed with caution about how you and I interact about this. Not because I think you are going to get offended or whatever, but because I want to make sure that I'm voicing the opinions of other people correctly.
mhm,
But I think there are people from my community who they already are coming to the table or coming to this discourse with a whole bunch of presuppositions around how Jewish people, particularly in America, operate under whiteness
mhm,
because they're white passing and have historically and have leveraged that in all kinds of ways historically to amass power that they then leverage against black people in particular contexts. And I think that they are identifying, perhaps falsely, the context of Kanye West and the context of Kyrie Irving as a context in which Jewish people are doing exactly that. And they're very, very, very sensitive to it
mhm,
because that's their perception. Because fundamentally it is just a form of white supremacy. That's how they see it. And I understand, and a lot of them are not willing to hear your side or the Jewish community side of like that shit is actually deeply offensive to be accused of that when we were not regarded in the context of Nazi Germany in particular as white. We could not, we tried literally in under a context in which our literal lives depended on it. We tried with all of our being and we couldn't. So now, in the current contemporary context, to be accused of that deeply hurts. How
mhm,
dare you accuse us of that? You don't know our struggle. And when a black person or a member of my community hears that, they're not hearing you. They're
mhm,
hearing denial of white
mhm.
supremacy when we know, according to this view, that you're guilty of it. Not
That's
and then they over exaggerate and they they lay that at the feet of all Jews. When a lot of Jews ain't even white passing. Like a lot of Jews
mhm.
don't look like white at all. Like there are
Totally.
black Jews, like legit, like you know what I mean. Go ahead. I want to hear your take on that, but like,
No, totally. Yeah. Well, that's a big thing is, and that's something that I brush up against a lot in Clubhouse that really makes my blood boil. It's like, I'm not going to argue with anyone who racializes me as white. Okay. Like, I call myself a Jew, but like, I'm not gonna fight with anyone. Like, I know what I look like. I have like that much self-awareness. Right. Um, but this like insistence on forcing the Jews to like admit their white supremacy, it's sort of like what you were saying. It's not just like, oh, you don't understand what we've been through and historically the Holocaust. The fucking losers with the tiki torches, the actual white supremacists in this country don't view Jews as white. The actual white supremacists view Jews as some other category, or even worse, the people who look white and therefore use that power to undermine the white race. And so it's like, you know, a lot of people saying, and I almost hate this talking point because it doesn't get, the people who are making this claim don't give a fuck about dictionary definitions. So then they'll tell you, who writes the dictionaries and things are written by the victors and white people are whatever. Like you,
I'll take who are the Jews for 500, Alex.
like the dictionary definition of white supremacy, literally, right, is like
Yeah,
hatred of Jews and black people. And
yeah.
so it's like, stop literally deleting us from the definition. Um,
Mhm.
I think
Well, okay, I want you to finish, but I want to ask you a maybe
no.
perhaps uncomfortable question after that.
Ask me, please.
Well, okay, I think so. This is me trying to take account of nuance, and I'm not agreeing all the way because I actually genuinely don't agree with this perspective. But like, there does seem to be some validity to the idea, to the acknowledgement that a subset of the Jewish community are white passing in appearance and have leveraged that in various different ways politically throughout history in a distinctly American context where literally appearing or passing as white was like cash. Like there was a certain cachet to that. You literally could take that shit to the bank in certain ways, right?
Mhm.
So like so my members of my community are trying to put to stamp that, which seems like an undeniable fact. It's not universalizable to all Jews,
Hmm.
but it is an undeniable fact for a subset of Jews, and they mean to talk about that because they have a bone to pick with that. They are, I think, over exaggerating in terms of holding it against all Jewish people, but
Hmm.
at least with the subset of Jews that do that, I think their contention is like y'all are operating in a way where y'all get to kind of move back and forth between oppressor and oppressed at your
Yeah.
convenience, and I don't appreciate that because me as a black person, I to do that, and there's something substantive about that point. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I think the well, let me do the necessary throat clearing. There are bad Jews out there. There are naughty Jews, and like people who do bad things and wield power in whatever way they have to marginalize other people. I think the word that really sticks out to me, I guess, that I take issue with in the case that you just made is leverage. Race is in the eye of the beholder, right? Like, or that's at least how I personally perceive race, is like you are racialized by the people who are looking at you. And it's not stable, right? Because for some people in different contexts, they're going to look a different way depending on like the group that they're walking with, right? If you have, let's say, like a mixed person, and depending on the company that they're with, you might perceive them in different ways. The time of year, you might perceive someone, if someone with, an olive skin complexion gets a little darker, you might perceive them differently than how they look in the winter, in Vermont or something. And so race is how you are perceived. And so I think what I take issue with is this idea that the Jews, or the subset of Jews who got to power and whatever, were leveraging their whiteness. Like, it's just how they look. And I think it's that nefarious intent. It's assigning, like, you were gonna, first of all, most Jews in America came here within the last 100 years. And so sort of going back to that, like, not to go off topic, even though I'm notorious for doing that, this idea of the guy saying that like every white person is culpable if they weren't, like, part of abolition. Like, so many people that we consider white weren't here. They weren't in the country, right? They weren't on the land when this was going on. And so, like, I guess I do, it's like, if I, maybe in my life, I don't even want, people say, oh, what do you mean maybe? Let's assume in my life that I have had an easier time doing certain things, or have been granted access to certain spaces because of how I'm racially perceived. Does that mean I leveraged it? I think leverage to me brings in an intentionality that I don't know is fair to attribute to people. Like, if that's just how someone looks, are they powdering their face, to go and get that job, to then like overcharge black people rent? Or is this just how do you get what I'm saying? It's like
Yeah,
almost
I
a
understand.
silly point, but that's where I feel it's, because it's always so much of the anti-Semitism that bugs me is the nefarious intent. It's the sneaky conniving part of it that comes in. And I'm sure you can make that the argument you made uh, a few minutes ago about another group of people. It's not, inherent to Jews, but it certainly comes up a lot with Jews
In terms of
because
like
we
being
are
white passing.
overrepresented. Or in terms of like leveraging, yeah, their white passingness to gain power and whatever. I
Well,
think it's
there's a
done a lot
distinct
with Jews.
there's something unique about the Jewish community because what it means to be Jewish it operates in a way that's actually distinct from race categories
Mhm.
usually. So as an ethno religion, right, it's actually a category that is a blend of categories that we usually keep separate. We usually keep religion as a separate bucket and race as a separate bucket. But but and then also there's the whole complexity between what exactly is the difference between race and ethnicity. But now we have a bucket where you basically have ethnicity and religion merged. And also
Mhm.
there's a cultural element too. You can be ethnically Jewish, you can be religiously Jewish, and you can be culturally Jewish. And that's actually a paradigm that my people and my community do not encounter regularly. It's actually foreign.
Totally.
So now they're adapting a very nuanced paradigm to race category. And they're just folding it in there in a way that's awkward because that's gonna make you say a bunch of things about different types of Jews that are not true. And I learned this because I formally studied Judaism in the context of college. I took a monotheistic religions class that I didn't have to take, but I was interested and I wanted to learn. That was the first time I actually got to apply my inquisitiveness to religions that weren't my own religion, because I was very ignorant about those religions, Judaism and Islam specifically. So I learned that, but not a lot of people in my community learn that, unless either they are practicing Jews, in which case they would be more likely to learn it, or they studied it somehow. So basically, to wrap it up, like, it's interesting to me to watch this unfold in this discourse between my community and your community, because there's a lot of ignorance in my community about those nuances, even though there's in some sense insight on other historical things or aspects that maybe some Jewish people are ignorant of. So, like, for example, the extent to which Jews actually participated in the transatlantic slave trade. My impression is that there are members of your community that are actually unaware of that. And when they become aware, they're in some sense dismayed by that. They're like, dang, us? No, not us. No, we wouldn't do that. Right. And then some of y'all are kind of like, you're like, no, there's some bad Jews. Like, we acknowledge, like, those Jews are horrible Jews. Like, they shouldn't have done what they
Mhm.
did. Right. But a lot of Jews are like completely taken aback by that. Like, what? We did that? Like, that's kind of effed up. Like, I hate that we did that. Like, and as a community, it's like, oh man, like, I don't want our community to be guilty of that kind of thing. Like, especially given what we've been through, right? But like, my community and your community sometimes talk past each other because
Totally.
we come in there with all of this baggage about all this oppression we faced, and we don't want
Yes.
to hear shit about oppression from any other group. We are self-righteous. Our communities, we have our factions that are really self-righteous about what we've been through as a collective, and we're just like, nah, like, you're. And then we play weird oppression Olympics with each other,
While accusing the other person
while,
of
like,
playing oppression
yeah.
Olympics.
And so sometimes you need like, it helps to have members of each of our communities to be able to be like, okay, let's acknowledge the high stakes nature of the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
but let's take a step back and not be in our feelings, and because if we're too emotional, we're gonna miss the substance. And I like that you and I can have this, because we I don't know, I get along with Jews. I don't know what it is.
I told
It's a
you.
thing. I don't know. I actually said this in a room one time. I'm like, I just noticed, like, I just get along with Jews on Clubhouse, and like, everybody, all the Jews will be like, yeah, like, we kind of like you. I'm like, I don't know what it is. Like,
No, the Jews like you too. That's the thing.
the Jews like,
Yeah.
but it's
It's
like, it's funny because, like, it just happened to happen that way. Like, I'm not
it's
actively
organic.
seeking out, yeah, but
It's
I'm not like
totally
actively
organic.
seeking out favor with Jews. But it's just like, I guess it's refreshing. It's good that it happens in the world of Kanye West anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm.
I do think, so I know you got to go soon, but I do think, since I promised that we touch on it, that Kyrie Irving is a little bit different, and I'm wondering what you think about Kyrie.
Um.
So Kyrie Irving is distinct from Kanye in that Kyrie's sin, so to speak, was like less egregious in my opinion, because he posted the No documentary, but it wasn't even clear that he was endorsing it per se, but he maybe perhaps tacitly endorsed it by platforming it on his Twitter. But then he took all of the steps to apologize and learn stuff, and I don't know how satisfactory that's going to be, especially in the wake of, it seems, Whoopi Goldberg has tripled down on her comments after her apology tour. But what do you think about, and I think that the accusation that Kyrie Irving was treated unfairly has a little bit more substance than Kanye West. But what do you
Yeah.
think?
I agree with that. I'm not fond of Kyrie Irving. I don't care very much for him. Jews in all three of these situations, Kanye West, Kyrie Irving, and Whoopi Goldberg, there's a major catch-22. I feel, at least. And I know a lot of Jews feel this way. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like, if we call it out and ask for repercussions and we get it, then we actually like can control the world. And then if not, then we're allowing the platforming of hatred or whatever, or allowing these things to propagate unchallenged. Many Jews also believe that sort of current Jewish institutions in America and maybe globally are not really, they're not doing what we need of them. They're not maybe fighting for Jews in the best way. I think with Kyrie Irving in particular, I think, Jason, to be fair, you left out a little part, which is before he went through all his apology tour. Um, he doubled down when he was asked. You're right. All he did at first was tweet the documentary. There was no commentary. But then when he was first confronted about it, he said, like, I know who I am. If I know who I am, then I can't be anti-Semitic, right? So there it wasn't like he was confronted with this and then said, wow, I had no idea that this could be so detrimental and I'm sorry. Nor do I think that he has to say that if that's not how he feels. But I don't think it's like true to say that he did this one thing that was like, that maybe he wasn't even endorsing and then he just started apologizing. There was a lot in between that. People
No,
also,
the
he also,
I would
after the whole controversy. So if you obviously chronologically, this happened after Kanye started on his months long, obsession with Jews. But so after Kyrie tweeted that, and after Kyrie started catching some heat, Kanye and Kyrie were hosting an event together. The event ended up not happening, but there were like Eventbrite tickets out there. They were hosting like some Donda event together. And so this idea of like, oh, Kyrie was just being swept up in it, because of Kanye, like, no, there was an intentional alignment and there was an intentional reluctance, probably because he actually believes in certain BHI doctrine, right? There was an intentional reluctance there was a reluctance to really engage. Now, I think this sort of public flogging, for lack of better words, doesn't help anyone. I don't think it teaches people not to be anti-Semitic. And I think it only reinforces this idea that the Jews wield all of this power. And I don't want Jews being the thought police. I don't want the ADL speaking on behalf of Jews to be the one who came up with that list of demands, right? And who says that it's reasonable? And who says that after that anything would be different? There's this joke that's not funny in the Jewish community. Like when someone's anti-Semitic, like take them to a Holocaust museum. Like, why the hell do you think that if someone is espousing hatred of Jews, you should go bring them to a place that talks about like murdering Jews? It's like this weird, we think that all of this babbling to say, I don't know. I don't think we're actually trying to combat that person's like inner, I don't know, bigotry, if we want to call it that, by asking them to make all these public declarations and statements and donations. I don't know what the purpose of that is.
well,
And it
it's
feeds
it's it's
conspiracy.
it seems like it has an analogy to kind of the Scarlet Letter, and how a person who deviates with certain behavioral norms and commits adultery has to wear that Scarlet Letter publicly and undergo various forms of public shaming as recompense for their deviation from behavioral expectations. It seems like there's a analogy there with
Mm-hmm.
this kind of thing when it comes to cancel culture and
Right.
apology tours and people, who are deemed guilty in the court of public opinion of anti-Semitism, or perhaps actually did say things that were problematic, or I think properly diagnosed as anti-Semitic on some level, maybe. With Kyrie Irving, it's interesting because I do remember his initial pushback. I think that he doesn't really get that much nuance in that, because I don't know that his pushback was really a doubling down on anti-Semitism so much as it was a visceral rejection of an attempt, I think he perceived, by the media to paint a false narrative of him, because I don't think he perceived what he did or
Mm.
anything that he believed as anti-Semitic. I think he was viscerally rejecting that narrative because he didn't feel like it applied, and he already doesn't trust the media. And so he was thinking the media is up to no good with their malevolent intent, trying to get a sensational story. and they already have been getting sensational stories after him with other related matters. So I think that that was really rooted in that. However, I don't know what Kyrie Irving believes with respect to certain
Right.
BHI tenets, so it's really hard for me to defend him too tough, not knowing that. For all I know, maybe he does or was even considering espousing BHI tenets because they appeal to other presuppositions he has about black people and their relationship to the divine. Because I think one of the biggest appeals of from my members of my community to BHI is that what it does is it reifies the idea that black people are God's chosen people, and that is something that is in the context of a people who've been oppressed and marginalized by people who called themselves Christians, who viewed us as damned because of the color of our skin. I understand in that context why a people that are the descendants of those people would gravitate towards a religious set of presuppositions that has us as the chosen people, the real chosen people. Like, I get the appeal, even though I disagree with that because of
Yeah.
its implications with
Well, and
respect to the
also
Jewish
one
community.
of the insanities within that is so to reject that condemnation that Christianity, right, like brought upon my people, your people is what I'm saying. You people, is
Uh-oh.
like,
Microaggression.
yeah, is you're in order to fight that, you're adopting a Christian cult. Like it's the tenets of this pseudo religion cult group, whatever you want to call it, are based in Christianity. I mean, they're based. I'm not even. I don't even want to like say that it's an accurate reading of Christianity or of the Bible, because I obviously don't think that it is. Not that I know much about Christianity, and most
There are a
Jews.
lot of tenets of Christianity that are implicitly applied to various versions of BHI, and BHI has different variations itself.
Right.
So you're right, and black people have been historically um, either Christian, and then there's also a distinct tradition of black Muslims too in our communities. Black Jews is more rare, but it does occur.
Mm-hmm.
But the two bigger
Well, because we're
Abrahamic
not a
faiths,
religion like that. We're not a proselytizing religion, so it's
yeah,
not the type of thing that you just take on. To become a Jew, if you're not a Jew, means you're dedicating at least a year of your life to a really rigorous process and joining a community, right? So it's not something that you can independently take on a belief system and then become. So that's also why you're going to see lower prevalence rates, and why there's lower prevalence rates of Jews worldwide, because we're not trying to convert anyone. In fact, I don't know if you know this, I don't know, maybe you do because you've studied religion, but so anyone who's converting to Judaism ritually gets rejected 3 times, because the idea is this is a very serious thing that you're taking on, and it's not for the faint of heart, and it shouldn't be for any reason other than you essentially feel like you already are. Like you feel like your soul was there with the rest of the Jews at Mount Sinai. But any Jew who converts will be rejected at least 3 times, because we don't believe that everyone needs to be a Jew, or they're not going to get into heaven. We don't even really believe in heaven or hell. And so that's also where like this idea of religion kind of comes after Judaism. So one way that I like to describe it, and it's not perfect, is like there's a group of Jews, and Judaism was the culture religion of that group of people, right? And people can join that tribe the same way like Native American tribes, some of them at least, are they don't recruit, but you can join, whether that be through marriage or through some type of process where you're taken and accepted and you're part of the community. But that's like a much more accurate description of what it is to be a Jew, and why you're going to see less black Jews, for example, than you're going to see black Muslims or black Christians.
I mean, I think that is definitely a contributing factor. It's an interesting question, and I know we got to go soon, but it's an interesting question to what extent that reifies the perhaps not very well founded suspicion that Judaism is in some sense exclusive of black people, and that's
Right.
why you would even need
So
black
not,
Hebrew
but yeah.
Israelites, is because they're really trying to claim something that isn't theirs. That's my conspiratorial hat, but I don't really buy into that kind of stuff. I'm really just trying to be provocative for no reason.
Mhm.
But I will say this because I really appreciate your time, and I know you got to go soon. I have 2 questions. The
Mhm.
first question is, Um, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very, very, very likely, and one being not likely at all, how likely are you to return to be a guest on my podcast?
Oh, I would love to come back. We have a lot more to talk about, so
We got yeah.
yeah.
Well, I didn't overdo it with my jokes about Judaism or Jewish people, so
You
I
can
didn't
bring more of
overdo.
those next time.
I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't think you want that.
Oh no, because
No,
that's
I'm
the
kidding. I'm
thing.
kidding. I'm kidding.
Yeah. Well, and I know you know this, but like that's also the problem with like policing people's words and thoughts is like also like we say mean things to be funny, and funny is a good thing and brings people together and can be a way to bond, right? And so in I'm stating the obvious here, but in an interaction of good faith, people from two different communities can make jokes with each other, right?
Yeah.
And it can actually be a bonding experience instead of somehow perpetuating harm against the other.
And I think you and I did that in various different ways. They were very, and I did this kind of tongue in cheek, but I kind of pointed out that a lot of the kind of jokes that we made or the sarcastic remarks that we made implicating each other's communities could have been taken. There could have been offense taken, and I think I made some kind of comment about, oh, that's
Microaggression.
microaggression. Yeah, but it's like I'm a good, I have a sense of humor. And I think you use the phrase "you people." I've actually seen people overreact to that phrase, like it's a big, like it's such a big deal. Like, who is you people? What do you mean? It's like,
I also said it jokingly, right? Because what I said was
right,
your
right, right,
people, and then I made the joke, "Oh, you people." But
right,
yeah,
right, and I took that as stride, but it was just like the thing I was signaling when I said that's a microaggression is like that's you, that like a certain kind of person would take deep offense to that, and
totally.
to a degree where it's like it's not necessary to. It's like why are you tripping over that? It's not that deep.
Well, and they take deep offense to that in order to discount whatever else was said in the sentence, right?
Yeah, well, some of them are genuinely offended, but some of them actually, I think they weaponize the indignation to like gain an upper hand in a debate about race issues or something, and that's
Yeah.
annoying. All right, so the last thing is on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being a lot and one being not at all. How much did you enjoy being a guest on the podcast?
Oh, you know,
If I get
I should.
anything less than a 6, you're anti-black. Just kidding. I'm
Um,
kidding. I'm kidding.
no, I had a great time. What I really should let you know is that I like if I will do a lot of things, but rank something on a scale from 1 to 10, it's like one of the hardest things you could ever ask me. When the doctor says, "What is your pain 0 to 10?" Like I don't know what a 0 is, what a 10 is, or what a 5 is. But Jason, I had a really positive experience, and I would definitely do it again. High rating,
I heard 10. That's what I
tens
heard.
across the board. Yeah,
It's not about what you said. It's about what I heard.
yeah.
No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you having you on and you volunteering. I didn't even know you wanted to. You just kind of like put that in my back channel. I was like, oh, dope.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, we didn't talk directly about the things that we meant to talk about per se, but we talked about it in a substantive way and in a natural, organic way that I think is actually going to be very, very valuable. So
Yeah,
look out.
and we opened the door, so now we have different roads that we can go down if we want to do another conversation.
Exactly, exactly. And also my Lakers won today. I was distracted a couple times, but they won a very close game.
Was
Um,
that tough?
yeah. All right. Hang out and I'm gonna wrap this up and then I'm gonna say goodbye off air to
Sounds
you.
good.
All right. And there you have it, folks. That was yet another episode of the Black Muse Podcast. We went long today, but it was totally worth it. I enjoyed having a conversation. These kinds of conversations are part and parcel of the conversations I try to cultivate on Clubhouse, and I try to bring that to this space here. Um, and it was really, really cool to have someone so unique. I think this is actually the second woman I've ever had on my podcast, but someone with a unique combination of identity markers, someone from the Jewish community, someone from the LGBTQ community, who was able to just kind of sit and just talk. And I think to go to the topic of the room, like the to be able to just talk freely and be able to speak my mind without there being this looming like ever present risk of offending someone is part and parcel why I think the free speech crowd kind of has a point, and the hate speech crowd I think is underestimating the value of being able to enable people to speak by not policing their speech. So that's kind of one of the things I think was demonstrated by this conversation. Even though we didn't talk about it directly and get into the nuances philosophically of that in particular, we still talked about it in a kind of indirect way by sharing our experiences. So I hope y'all enjoyed it. And until next time, peace.